The following podcast is brought to you by CDKOffers.com. Use offer code DIESHRINK for 3% off everything on the website and Broken Silicon for 25% off all Windows codes. All right, on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and I will let my guest for this week introduce himself.
Hi, guys. My name is Guest, and I'm here to talk a bit about Azure.
You almost said it.
I almost said it. So used to it. And I'm here to talk a bit more about cloud, Azure specifically, which is the type of public cloud that I use, and a bit of gaming and maybe a bit of SAP if anyone is interested to RP software. Mostly nobody is.
Well, you introduced yourself as guest, and so let's just be clear about that, because for some reason I see this in the comments all the time of like, why doesn't he ever address him by his name? Isn't that weird? And it's like, no, this guest is one of the guests choosing to not say his name, right? And you're willing to talk about all the subjects we've discussed ahead of time, both offline and with patrons who submitted questions, Azure, Xbox, gaming, consoles, development, all of that, but that you don't specifically want to say who you are or what company you... And it's because, I suppose, let me also say this for you as well. You probably want to say the thoughts you have are your own and not your company's, right?
Yeah, exactly. Let's keep it classic. As for all the guests you do, so I like it to keep it classy, yeah, definitely.
Well, and whether you really need to be anonymous or not, I think to a certain extent, why not have that layer of anonymity? That's why I don't put my personal information everywhere, though I'm sure someone could find out who I am if they really wanted to. I mean, there's a lot of wackadoodles out there.
Yeah, it's especially easier these days, not just on the enterprise environment, but on the personal level to get your information out there. I actually worked with someone who was a security expert a few years ago, and now he turned into corporate. And one of the first things he told me when we started talking about security is like, man, we can literally find anyone's info right now. And it's not just because of social media or anything. It's just literally, it's everywhere. You just buy like a goddamn list from some website and there's a ton of information.
Yeah. So... welcome to Broken Silicon. You're actually someone that reached out to me. I am curious, I like to ask guests who reach out to me, especially anonymous ones, like, what made you discover Moore's Law is dead, and what made you specifically reach out?
So that's interesting. So the first time I ever found Moore's Law is not dead, I think I was discussing something on some old website. I remember it was around the time you released your video about RDNA 1. That was a few years back, I believe.
That would have been in 2019. Which video about RDNA 1? There were definitely a few.
Oh, I remember it's the 5700 XT, definitely. That was the one card I wanted.
Like talking about it after it was coming out? Or okay.
It was right after it was coming out. I was looking for information.
Yeah, I was one of the few people. There were a lot of haters on the 5700 XT for some reason. I never understood that.
I don't know. I mean, from the consumer side, from me for gaming, I never got one because I got a deal on a 2070 card for like 200 euros, which is really cheap on the cheap side. So I got that deal. But I know a couple of guys, friends of mine, who got it.
That's really cheap. That's cheap even converted to US dollars, even back then.
That's what happened when miners, basically casual miners, get into business and they start seeing, oh, there's a drop. I guess it's time to sell. The time to sell memes are real. Definitely.
Well, which I think they will happen again within a year.
Oh yeah, let's hope so. Let's hope so. I actually got it.
Go on.
Yeah, I actually got it. I was gonna say I actually got it RTX 380 back in December. The last year of the last day of the year, which was before the price increase due to the tariffs. So yeah, I somehow got one, and it was just pure luck. I was just refreshing the retailers next to me website at 5 a.m. and I got one for 800 euros, which is a miracle these days when you say 800 euros for a 380. So
it sounds like you discovered Moore's Law is dead because a random YouTube video was suggested to you, as most people discover channels that way. But
not really. It was on hardware. On Reddit. Okay. It was on hardware. back then people were discussing the 570, and I think there was a comment where someone highlighted, hey, there's this dude with some good thoughts on it, and you guys should look into him.
So what made you specifically reach out directly to me, though? Like, I don't know if it was the server engineer episode, or was there a specific Broken Silicon that made you want to start, giving me some of your experience working with some of the stuff we discuss on Broken Silicon and such?
The reason I reached out was it was mainly because of the server engineer. That was the episode that convinced me, because there were a lot of people discussing, oh, Intel's bad, Intel stuff, we should all go AMD. And then I'm like, hey guys, this is kind of complicated for me, because like 90% of my workloads, they're Intel only, exclusive. I can't just grab an AMD virtual machine and just start working on it. That there is no support from AMD for these, because SAP has a deal with Intel until 2025 or 2030 or whatever it is. It just keeps being renewed ever since I started working on this. So we're exclusively working on Intel, and to be honest, it's not bad. Besides the security issues, not bad. I'm kind of happy about Cascade Lake. That's what was the last machines we kind of deployed on the production level. Ice Lake machines are still not available for us, the certified ones. But yeah, for me, Intel equals Optane, and that's what I love. It's memory,
and that's
fast memory.
And I think sometimes people get these blinders where they forget that what they want is not necessarily what other people want, that it's not really a right or wrong thing all the time. It's like for you, and I've had other people on who are guests that said the same thing. It's like, basically it seems like someone thinks Optane is the dumbest thing on earth, or someone thinks, well, Optane is a godsend, so I guess I'm using Intel, right?
Yeah.
Like it's one or the other.
I think at the end of the day, it depends on the type of workloads. Like on my company where I work at, we do definitely have AMD. We have EPYCs all around, essentially Rome. That's the major deployment that we have for your average workload stuffs, that people do on the cloud. But for more specific workloads like SAP, and especially HANA, which is that database that we run under SAP currently, it wants memory. It wants the more bandwidth you got, give it to it, because especially on production environments that are set up with clusters mainly, you want to give the maximum memory, and this is something we'll definitely talk about. Within the podcast.
Which, before we get into that, the point in the discussion, script that we have here that I think I want to get to first is actually, so what is your PC gaming lineage? Like, you can say as much or as little as you want, obviously, about where you're from. I don't think you want to say exactly where you live, but what got you into gaming, and what's your kind of history of PC gaming, and how did that lead into the work you do?
My first interaction with a computer was back when I was 4 and 5. I'm from Europe. I forgot to say, I'm from Europe, so we can
tell you're not from Alabama.
Definitely. So the discussion here started with my family, because I wanted to try a computer, because I had a friend of mine from school back then, from the preschool, who told me, hey, we got this sweet computer at home. I'm playing Age of Empires. I'm like, what the hell is Age of Empires, man?
Dude, that's what got me into PC gaming, actually, too.
But my console side also started around the same time, because I got to try a PlayStation 1 back then, the fat one. The classic one with the sticks, with just the up and down, left and right side arrows. So not even the analog sticks that came with Apex Escape, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, that's how it really started. It started with Age of Empires. It went on to Battlefield, Command and Conquer, the really first Battlefield, 1942, which was really great.
Battlefield blew me in a. I mean, who wasn't blown away by Battlefield when that first came out with 1942 and Battlefield 2?
Oh man, I was just discussing this a few days ago with a friend of mine who also played the Battlefields, but the one that really decided my fate, where I'm at right now, was World of Warcraft back in 2005, 2004 or 5, something around that time. I remember skipping school and skipping being with friends to just play World of Warcraft. But that's how it really started, because World of Warcraft for me, and that's one of the reasons I still play the game, is I learned Lua scripting back then. Back in 2006 to design some add-ons for the community, because we had a raid group in WoW And people were like, "Hey man, I really wish we could do like an add-on for this kind of stuff here to say and to yell in the game while doing role playing and stuff." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna look into it." So yeah, that's how it started with Lua scripting, basically.
Right. It started with, you wanted something and you're like, well, let's see if I can actually make it myself. Right?
Exactly. And I'm not really a developer or programmer. I mean, I'm a low-level guy. I do a lot of bash scripts and I use Ansible. For those who don't know, Ansible is a deployment and automation tool. That's what I do on my day-to-day basis for deployments on Azure. But yeah, it led me to know more about hardware and software. And that really grew on me. That's how I got it into today, and there's many things I do in life that reminds me of that moment, and I think that's one of the moments that really kept with me. And I still play the game after 15 years or 16. I've lost the count at this point. But yeah, in terms of hardware, it was also around that time where I first upgraded my computer. So we had a Packard Bell computer. I think it was part of HP back then. I don't remember. But the first time I opened it up, it was because the computer wouldn't start on. I think I was on Windows XP or something, but one of the RAMs fried. That's all I remember. One of the RAM sticks fried. So I opened it up and I was taking pictures of it with my old ass camera, and then went to reveal them to show to my friends. Hey man, my RAM is like this, and he's like, dude, that thing is fried. No wonder the computer doesn't start. You need a new one. I'm like, okay, where should I go? Oh, there's a cool hardware shop here nearby. So I took the computer there and I told him, hey guys, I got a fried RAM stick, and he's like, oh, what is this kid all about? How does he know what is a fried RAM stick? And then he went on with me. Took off the whole components of the motherboard with that terrible PSU that I had to switch like 2 times from warranty because it was always breaking, especially in summer. For some reason, it was always in summer. And the guy literally just started removing stuff from the computer inside, And I was like, whoa, this is pretty cool. And I was like, hey man, where can I learn this stuff? And he's like, well, this is from the books time, right? We still have internet, but not a lot of people had internet. So the guys always said, hey, just take this book. They gave me a book about components and hardware. I don't remember the writer, but that's how I started. And from there, I went to LAN houses, play Counter-Strike with a lot of people back then. It was the weekends were like that. I would just hang out at home, play online in real tournament, Battlefield, whatever.
And so then you went to college. You said you studied, obviously this is where the interest came from, but when you actually decided to focus on, what technically did you major in? I know you mentioned you
I didn't major in anything. I actually didn't went to university. That's an interesting story. So my parents didn't want me to go to university. So when I was around the 9th grade, which is when you pick the high school course that you have, and here in Europe we have professional ones, like there is in Germany. Like you take a specialty to start working at your 18. When you're 18. So that's what I did. And there was one course that I started, which was 2D and 3D animation. So basically the course was all about making 3D models, making animations on those 3D models that you made, do some video editing stuff. We went on for 3 years like that. And then we had to specify what we wanted. So obviously I wanted gaming, right? So that's when I started to do some cool stuff in gaming, try out some engines. 3D game engine, stuff like that. It went on from that, then Unity, Unreal, and even today I sometimes pop up Unreal Engine and just do some random stuff. But I think the thing that struck me most was 3D Max and Maya for the animation. That's where I really started to do stuff and started to sell, which later on I went to freelance to do that for a year or two.
From there, I believe you joined a company that works heavily, very heavily, right, with people at Microsoft on Azure, SAP, on servers. And I think some people would go, so wait, is this technically Microsoft? It's like, well, when I worked at General Motors, some of the suppliers for General Motors might as well have worked at General Motors, right? You would get lunch with these people and such, right? So what can you say about what your job is then and what your exposure to Microsoft and Azure is?
So right, I started my job around when I finished the course, and I did some couple of months or a year and so of freelancing for 3D models. That's what I did most before starting a job, and I ended up landing a job at a consulting firm here in Europe, and that consulting firm was a Microsoft partner and an SAP partner, basically. From all the sides, basically. And what happened was that how I ended up there, most people must be wondering. Well, a few years back, I tried to play World of Warcraft on Linux. And that's how my trip into Linux started, because I was tired of Windows Vista, basically. And that's when I started to look into Ubuntu, looking into Linux distros, looking how you make your own NAS at home, which many people use these days, right? But back then it was like a mystical stuff. Nobody had it. And I had a bit of background on servers, Windows servers and stuff like that for the community, because I tried and ran some servers, especially for Battlefield back then. I ran some of the private servers, so you go to the provider back then and you rent it and you learn about it, you install it and stuff. So that's how I started on the server side. Linux, it was more of a thing, a personal level for me, because I like Linux. I like the liberty and the freedom of it to do what you want, compile what you want, and I like to fix problems. That's how everybody gets into IT, to be honest. There are people who like to troubleshoot, basically. So fast forwarding a bit, I got into this consulting firm, and when I did the interview, they asked me, "Hey, so you're a guy, you just finished high school, you got this diploma on 3D and 2D animation, and I think that it has much to do with us, but we were very surprised with something here, which is your Linux and Windows Server experience. How come someone that does 3D animation ends up working with that?" And I was like, "Well, you got to pay the bills."
Yeah.
And some guys from my group friends wanted some servers going, so I rented them and sold them with support a bit more expensive. That's all. I made like $10 per server. And that's how I got into the consulting firm. They needed people with Linux experience, which is hard to come by. I mean, not these days. A lot of people come out of high school. But back then, like in 2014, it was really hard, especially in Europe, where there's a lot of PC gamers, but nobody uses Linux, basically. It's a lot of Windows people, and most people just know how to troubleshoot stuff.
So what really caught my eye when we started talking to each other offline was really that you were able to touch on the Xbox Series X APU and what it was originally designed for, which was something from, other people beforehand. It's, public knowledge, right? That the Xbox Series X is going to be used in xCloud. That specifically, it wasn't just designed to run one high resolution instance locally for gaming, that it's literally publicly been disclosed that they wanted to be able to have it handle multiple cloud instances in 1080p. Well, I guess the first reader mail here, which of course people can write in these if they support us on Patreon, is from Laws, and he says, was the Xbox Series X APU originally designed to also be used for servers? Can you speak to what you've heard speaking with people at Microsoft yourself?
Yeah, sure, definitely. It makes sense. So I'll give a quick example. This is an example I was given by the guy who told me this. So basically, Google has Stadia, right? So when you start making a system on chip or any type of server, you always start to think, hey, what if we pull out because there's no financial gain from this, or it's simply not working? You need a plan B. I mean, I think everybody always does that with any type of product, even on my job or on anyone's job. Everybody also has a B plan. And I think that's what touched mostly on the SoC on the Xbox Series X. It's because essentially it was designed by the Azure team. I think this is public knowledge. People said this in Hot Chips last year.
I don't think it's repeated enough, though.
Yeah, I don't think it's
how much involved the server engineers at Microsoft were. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is something that I think people have a misconception, that it was like designed for consoles and then they also kind of brought in server people. It's like, no, from the beginning, the Xbox APU was designed maybe first for a console, but also from its inception to also be a good server chip. That a lot of the design choices, a lot of them were for server, right?
Exactly. But if we look at the Microsoft team, the Azure team does a lot of stuff. I work with a lot of people from Azure, and they're all amazing. When I mean these people are internal people from Microsoft, not their partners. They have a lot of support partners.
Actual Azure people.
Actual engineers with actual beta programs and alpha programs that you can, if you're a partner, you can join. And these people here, they're really smart. And when I say smart, I don't want to say like Jim Keller type of smart, but they're really kind of smart people on the hardware front. That's why you have so much white paper documentation on Azure to know how to run stuff and how to deploy stuff. These people are really smart. And this engineer that I talked to, he essentially told me that the idea was xCloud all along. I mean, this was a pipe dream. I mean, if you look at Sony and the Gaikai system all along from all those years back then, this is a dream. This is a goal for everybody, not just the consumer, but for the server people as well.
To stream games.
Exactly. And if you think about it, if you're going to make a local play console like the Xbox Series X, who better to do it than your own hardware team, which is actually on Azure, right? Because they develop racks, they develop cooling systems, they develop the whole infrastructure for a data center, not just one, but cross-region data centers. And that's, I think that's a big problem, and the big thing that people don't think about it is that the Azure team, it's a global team, it's a global effort. And they're not just popping up vCore CPUs into a rack and just putting them there. They're doing all kinds of stuff to make this as compact as possible, as less power consumption as possible. And they work with a lot of people, not just from TSMC and other partners, but vendors like Fujitsu and Lenovo and Dell. So I think this is a global effort on all types of support, and the chip essentially on the Xbox Series X. If you look at it. And from the hot chips presentation, you literally see, hey, this was made for a server. I mean, these guys.
I think it's painfully obvious. I think there's this breakdown in the way, let's be honest, console fanboys argue about it. They go, well, why does it have this many teraflops? Why is it clocked lower? Why is the RAM organized in a segmented way? I just don't think people get it. It's because it was built to be a server chip, and that's what it was meant to do. And it can also game quite well, but that's why it's bigger than the PS5's die. That's why some things are organized in a way that if you're talking strictly for local gaming, it isn't the most efficient way of doing it, but it can do multiple things better than the PS5 could.
Oh, definitely. And there's a subject on the chip that I would like to discuss, which is if you look at it, it has scalability possibilities. What this means is if you're a cloud guy or someone who interacts with cloud, there's a thing called scale out. Basically, once you have a lot of stuff coming in, a lot of users using your system, not talking about just gaming, but everything, it's just how it works. You're going to need to scale out. Like, I'll give a quick example. Like the Fallout game that came out last year during the pandemic, when it started, it got really popular. Why? It was free on PS Plus, right, for example. And they got a lot of people coming in. And what they did, they scaled out. They started putting more servers. They started to try and maximize the most possibilities they could on the server side to deploy more servers, deploy more load balancers to, like, a load balancer basically works like once a player tries to connect, it will tell you, hey, where are you from? Okay, you're from Europe. Okay, so I'm going to connect you to the servers in Europe. Okay, but from the servers in Europe, which one are you going to go to? And this needs scale out for the massive players coming in. And this is something we'll definitely touch on, so I won't get into it. But literally, if you look at the chip, it's a chip made for scalability, and it makes sense because of xCloud. And Microsoft always knows stuff ahead of the public knows, right? Like, we never knew that the xCloud would be so good, because it is good. I tried it on the phone. On the first alpha, it
sounds like it might be the best one right now, at very least. One of the best. Way better. At the very least, we can say far better than Stadia, which is hilarious because you'd think Google would do this well, but guess not.
I don't know why, this is something I always get surprised by people. Like, people say, Google is definitely going to nail it. Why? They have zero experience on gaming. I mean, sure, they got the cloud, but there's a lot of workloads, and not everybody runs game servers there, because there's a problem with Google Cloud, which is the lack of tools to literally work on matchmaking AIs. But this is something we'll discuss later on as well. But the thing is, once we look at Microsoft, the pictures change. Why? Right? I mean, it's like when I discuss with people about AWS, Azure, and Alibaba, and all the public cloud providers that are out there, who would be the most appropriate one to making the dream reality? It definitely would be Microsoft. They have the engineers, the money behind it. They have the expertise from the Xbox team, which a lot of people that started there are still there to this day, and some of them even migrated to the Azure platform, which sometimes some names pop off in the beta programs where I'm at. And I'm like, hey, I know this guy. This guy did a presentation in free a few years back.
I guess the try to round it out, what I would just say is, again, like, if you're looking for like pure gaming, like, clock speeds are very important. You don't need as much of the compute in it. You strip that out to make the die smaller, and that's what Sony did with the PlayStation 5. But if you're going to use this for other things, then you throw in all this compute. A lot of that, I mean, I was actually kind of really surprised by the FP features inside of the Xbox Series X APU. And most developers aren't going to be able to use that for anything but minuscule performance boosts. But if it comes to, like what you said, running multiple instances, fetching multiple sets of data and running them at the same time, it's so you can do that efficiently. It's not so that you can run games more efficiently. But here's the benefit. You have to remember, Microsoft just came off of a pretty bad generation. Overall, the Xbox One didn't sell bad, but I think people forget that half of the sales were from momentum from the 360, that during the second half of the generation, it was selling very, very badly, and that they weren't sure if they'd be able to sell a lot of Xbox Series X's. And if Sony is making PS5s, they just have to go, we assume this many people will buy it. This is how much money we have. This is how much capacity we're able to allocate with AMD at TSMC to make it. We hope they buy this much. Now, it turns out they didn't make nearly enough, even though it's the best-selling console or something in history so far. But it's like, hey, if Sony could have planned for using it for multiple things, maybe they could have commissioned making far more. And I think people forget that, like, a major benefit of this is Microsoft can really control supply well, because as long as the Series X is selling well, which it is right now, it's of course vastly outperformed the Xbox One. If it stops selling well, they don't have to let a bunch of consoles sit on store shelves. They can just redirect the dies to a server, right, and build a server.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's probably not their priority right now. And that allows them to just not waste anything, basically, that they can keep making these. If they're hitting demand, if supply meets demand on their consoles, use it for something else. And I actually think that was what the plan was with the Series S as well, that if that one sold horribly, they have like a special Surface edition that they had planned for that as well. Which actually, not to completely keep going on here, but Fire Squatch writes in and says, hey, Tom, in the April loose ends, you mentioned the possibility of using a Series X or S APU in a Surface laptop. What has stopped Microsoft from making a Surface Book Xbox edition? I feel that it would really dominate the laptop market. Is it just because they want to sell as many consoles as possible? And at least my answer is, well, it's selling fine right now. There's no need to use it in laptops unless it wasn't selling well and they had leftover dies. But I don't know how if you would add anything onto that, or if you've heard anything specifically. You've always talked to me about the Series X. Have you heard anything about the uses of the Series S?
Yeah, so the Series S, I don't know much about, because essentially once we started discussing the Series X with this contact I had, what he essentially told me was that, look at all this crazy performance, this FP performance. You think FP, you think data, right? So you think, you think xCloud, obviously, because of the Xbox brand. But the Surface laptop is another crazy, interesting conversation, because if you look at the chip, it has GDDR6, right? I mean, it wouldn't be the most appropriate thing for a laptop, to be honest. But I think, and this is my opinion, because I've seen this happening, and I can also say that I'm part of some sorts of groups that discuss hardware as well around, and Microsoft going with their own hardware and their own chips, something possible. If we look at Google is doing that with Google Silicon. And I think after
and of course Apple, everyone knows
I mean,
Apple
I don't want to talk about the white elephant in the room, but the thing is, if you look at Apple and you see, oh crap, shit, these guys are doing crazy stuff with ARM, we should go into it, right? Because we have Windows and ARM is going to be a big business.
Yep.
Not just for enterprise, which already is happening, but for the consumer, which great battery life, great performance for those on Office and Outlook and Teams, no noise from the fan, because it's ARM. But yeah, the Surface laptop, I think it's a great product. I don't really like it much because of the lack of Thunderbolt. This is something personal taste. I know why they don't have Thunderbolt, but I don't agree with their local stuff that they say about being hacked through local usage, which is really really small chance of happening, but the Surface itself, I think a chip would be possible, because we've seen all these partnerships with AMD, and we've seen Microsoft Surface Laptop 3 and all the other products that they did. We told Ryzen, and this recent with the Ryzen 4000 series as well. So I'm really interested to see where the Surface go from here, and more from Microsoft in custom hardware, because I think that's that's where they got to put all their bucks in, because everybody's going to play that. Google's already playing at it. Apple has years away from from not doing that. Obviously, they've been doing it with the A series, and the M1 is definitely amazing. And what I can say about this is that ARM itself, it's really developing a lot. Compared to 2 years ago before the pandemic. Windows is running much better on ARM, obviously not as good as
right. This is clearly, I think, one of those long-term plans is not to rush ARM into Windows, but just slowly try to, over time, make Windows run well on ARM, but not force it overnight.
Yeah, and this is a subject we'll definitely touch on. But to summarize the Xbox Series X APU for me...
Well, and Series S,
Series
too.
X, sorry. Oh my god, you have no idea what these names are confusing.
Dude, you know how often I mix up the names on Broken Silicon, or almost do, but have you heard any other uses, though? Like, has it specifically been discussed for using in laptops, or is it not discussed as much as, like, what the X was?
For hardware, for consumer side, it's been discussed as an inspiration from what they can be able to achieve, all right? From the server side, it's possible to happen. I know a lot of people who say, but you guys in the servers use DDR RAM, right? Yeah, sure we do, but I'm not saying it's for me, for the professionals working for a partner on Microsoft that is going to use this chip, but they could use it internally, especially on the game services and AI, which is something I think he really hit on. Because if you look at the AI, how they did it in Titanfall and Forza a few years back during the Xbox One generation, but this new generation brings the xCloud, and I think this chip will be adapted for a lot of service that Microsoft will definitely offer in the future.
And when it comes to the amount of RAM in the Series X as well, I think people miss that the segmented memory was for two reasons. One, it runs Windows, like a version of Windows. So like having segmented memory is so they can program a game for DirectX 12 and then try to simplify the process of compiling it then on its console. So two different, segments of memory works fine for that reason. But also I do believe that in the cloud for xCloud, the Series X is planned to use 12 gigabytes instead of 6 for that system memory component. And then they'll just cram, 4 instances in 1080p into under 2.5 gigabytes of VRAM each, which from their perspective, when you're streaming, you really can't tell high-res textures that much anyways, because it's compressed. And so it's like, you have to remember that what they're planning to do really is 10 plus, I believe, then 12 for the server version, and that they decided to just give it 16 gigabytes in the local console, which, that's its own discussion. I kind of think that was a mistake in hindsight, but then again, that would have added like $50 to the cost, and it was already, right now, I suspect they're pretty happy considering how much the cost of everything has gone up right now.
When you're making a chip with multi-purpose like the Series X, for the scalability and all, and if you think about it, you have to cut corners, right? And we know how they did it with Xbox One with the SRAM back then. So for me, it's no surprise here when I saw the design revealed of the chip and hot chips. And essentially, the hot chips presentation for me was really important, especially at that time.
I wish Sony would have done something like that.
I don't think the Mark Cerny presentation, which for me, I'm a very big Mark Cerny fan.
It was halfway there. I agree. That was very hot chips-esque. There was just less of the specific silicon detail than you might expect. So Uni writes in and asks, where do we go from here as far as console gaming? With the advancement of PCs, is there really a need for a console?
Well, honestly, from my opinion, as long as they're exclusive games I want to play, there's a console for me. Like the Switch and the PlayStation, for me, makes sense. In my book, I have both. Animal Crossing for me is just awesome. Zelda as well, Super Mario. The reason Nintendo has me, it's not because of the hardware, definitely. It's because of the games. And that's what it is. Sony sells the amount of consoles they sell because of the games. And people just start preaching it to other friends that they come in as well. That's how we see so many single-player games being sold compared to, to the last few years that a lot of people like EA who said that, single-player games don't sell. Well, we saw Jedi Fallen Order.
They're wrong about that.
We know how Fallen Order went.
Good single-player games, yeah.
Exactly. Well, regarding hardware in itself, I think we're not done with consoles because a lot of conversation this year, and this comes from a cloud guy, I wouldn't game from the cloud, 100%. If I'm off for the weekend and I need, and I go into a big city, for example, and I'm like working on a project and I need to come back, but I know I'm going to be a few days away and I don't have my laptop with me or my Switch, I'm like, yeah, sure, I can do some gaming on the GeForce Now. I actually have been playing on it recently because I got it with my RTX 380 a year subscription. It's not too bad, you know. I mean, the latency is not too bad for single player games, but it's impossible for multiplayer games. So I think we're still gonna do local play for a couple of years more. And this is coming from a cloud.
I think, I was gonna say I've gotten into arguments on multiple broken silicons. I think local play is here forever, bar none. You can call me stupid if I'm wrong, but the way I would put it is this: no matter anytime internet gets better and it becomes cheaper to stream higher quality games, also getting cheaper is that, or stronger is that $500 box you call a console. It doesn't matter how good streaming gets, that $500 box is also going to get better, and probably better faster than you can stream the same quality. You're not streaming 4K HDR right now.
Yeah.
Stadia claims they are, but it looks like crap. I would just say I just think 500, as long as a console is cheap enough, it always has a place, right? And that local gaming will always be there for the hardcore due to latency reasons.
And there's simply people who don't want a game on a PC. My colleagues also do cloud work. The guys sit in front of the computer for like 8 to 10 hours a day. And the first thing they tell me, hey man, I'm off to play Destiny on the PS4. See ya. And I'm like, hey man, why do you keep playing on the PS4? You're a PC guy. Well, yeah, but I don't want to sit on the desk, you know. And a lot of people link the PC to the desk, obviously. Yes, you can say, hey, you can make a PC and link it to the TV. Yeah, man, but you want to start talking about HDR and all the compatibility problems with OLED? You really want to run stuff like that? For example, that's two objections for me, at least. But yeah, a lot of people want that disconnection from the desk. Not everybody wants to build a PC.
And I want to touch on that too, because I actually think the more this has become my job, where I'm constantly, I mean, this is of course a podcast, so they can't see it, but you can see me surrounded by all my hardware in my studio and stuff. It's like, you know, I have to admit that it is just kind of a mental wall that where I game, I sometimes want it to not feel like it's in the same space as where I work. And I think a lot of people say, oh, I like, you know, gaming on the couch, and that's why I use console. And I'm like, well, you can plug in a PC to the TV. I think why people want to game on the couch is because the couch subconsciously they link to relaxing, and if they work on their LCD screens or hopefully at some point OLED screens on a desk all day, they want to feel like they're in a different headspace. And I think more people, the older I get, the more I'm like, oh, that's a real thing. I still mostly game on PC, but it's definitely a real thing that when you work all day in front of LCD screens on a desk, you just want to be in a different shaped room while you're relaxing, if we're being honest.
And not just that. Well, I'll give it my personal opinion. I don't game a lot on PC besides World of Warcraft and Civilization. That's where that's what I game the most. But I have an RSI issue on my hand, which I developed during all these years of playing games with the mouse. And for me, it's less painful to play with the controller, obviously. So usually I just don't want to be on the desk. When the pandemic hit, my desk here at home, where I have my gaming PC with my ultra wide and stuff, and all my great headphones and all, I started working here, and that would become a really big issue for me, really quick. I started to think, well, you know what? I'm working and I'm starting to go to the right screen, which is where I have my gaming PC, and I started browsing on the web or just doing a couple of turns on Civilization. I'm like, I have to disconnect from that or I'm not going to get anything done. So I bought a second desk from on the other side of the house so I could work.
Yeah.
And that's a real thing. I know a lot of people do.
It is. It's a real thing. It sounds silly, and if you don't have the money, I understand. But there is a real thing to having a different space where you work versus where you play.
Oh, definitely. But talking more in general about the hardware of consoles, I think, honestly, I really love these consoles. The hardware on both are just completely insane, despite people just want to discuss which one is best. For me, it's like, dude, you have two amazing consoles that are better than 90% of the PCs out there for most people, which it's the reality. Everybody needs to accept it. Everybody needs to accept this. And honestly, for $500, why wouldn't you get one of these? I mean, if all you do is game, right? If all you do is game and there's nothing on the PC that you're exclusively playing, like a couple of people I know that got the PS5 but also have the PC for World of Warcraft. And they're like, yeah, man, if they put the World of Warcraft on the PS5, I'm going to stop building a PC. I'm just going to go straight to the console, you know, because it's 500 euros. I just get a console and be done with it. I don't have to have this big-ass case with two monitors. I'll just hook it up to there, get a nice keyboard and mouse combination for the sofa and stay there. And I completely understand, honestly. From the hardware perspective, I think the consoles are really good, like I said. And it's just it's not just performance for buck, but also it's your media center. I know a lot of people recently got the PS5 because they pre-ordered last year and they got it, and they're like, hey man, this is my first media center device. I don't have Chromecast, I just have an iPad and I watch movies on it. But I started looking into Netflix and Disney Plus on PS5, and this is pretty cool. They even got the remote and all, that multimedia remote that we look at it and like, ew, why would somebody buy that, right?
I don't know, just use the controller. I mean,
I don't know.
To go back to the original question from Uni, where do consoles go from here? It's like, well, each new generation, at least in Nintendo and Sony's opinion, is a new generation where they try to add new features they didn't have before and then price it so you want to buy it. And when a PS5, for example, is just $500 and a PC is $2,000, you're not going to spend just $500 to have something to run your TV, to use the new DualSense, to have a Blu-ray player, to play exclusives. It's not just for the exclusives, in my opinion. It's not just for like a DualSense. Like, the reason Nintendo and Sony continue to be successful is they keep making it cheap enough that it's like what you were saying. Well, it's a no-brainer to get this as well. And especially when it's like, would I get this console, or would I spend, $1,000 to play the same games I already can play on PC at a higher resolution, which is really a problem PC gaming is struggling with right now, I think. Although, when I say struggling, record sales. So, certainly not struggling monetarily right now.
I think it depends on the person at the end of the day. Like, I had a friend of mine who recently got into gaming again after all these years. Last game he played was like Battlefield 3. And he told me, hey man, with all the stock issues I did, obviously, I want to buy a good PC, and I have like this graphics card from my brother who gave it to me, like a 2060, and he's like, hey, you should just get the rest of the stuff and build a PC, And he's like, hey man, but I need a new laptop for college because I'm going back to college. And my budget is like 1.3K, and I'm like, oh man, that's gonna be hard with all the hardware and stuff. Obviously it's possible.
Yeah, you already have a 2060, man, which is plenty strong enough. I have a 2060.
Yeah, exactly. But
as well.
His problem was the lack of a laptop, and I was like, hey man, look, if you want, you can get like a laptop and a console. And he's like, yeah, you know what? I wanted to play Uncharted and wanted a new media center for my house because he didn't have any media center stuff nor a smart TV. So what he did was he literally bought the PS5 and ended up buying a MacBook Air, the M1. And then he's like, hey, yeah, sure, I still have the 2060, but I sold it. He recently sold it for 600 euros. What a profit. He literally
yeah, I mean, that's
console.
true. Then you could then sell the graphics card for that much now, and then use that to actually get a decent laptop that can play games because of how silly the desktop market is.
I really can't say anything because he's kind of right. All he wanted to do, his only game he wanted to play was really Uncharted. That's all he wanted to play. And I was like, yeah, you can play that. Yeah, but I can play to that app you told me, the PlayStation Now thing. And I told him, yeah, sure, but like the new ones and stuff, what if it comes out? Well, it's a choice that he ended up doing, and he's really happy about it because he has his media center, his console, 2-in-1, and had the laptop to go with him. He could have gone for a gaming laptop for all we know, but the man wanted to Uncharted, so give him Uncharted if that's what he wanted.
So, let me see here. I guess to move forward then, Michael Woodward writes in and asks, why is Windows 10 Desktop OS not on the Xbox consoles? I feel this would open up a lot of options for the budget gamer that can't afford to upgrade their PC. Also, it would give the Xbox a considerable advantage over the PlayStation. And I agree, by the way. Like, I guess I had some people suggest they were considering it, I suppose. But before the launch, I kept going, I think they're going to do it, and it looks like they're building it like a PC. Now I know it's for servers, but it's like, why are they not allowing you to run Windows on a Series X? At the very least, maybe not next-gen games will have enough RAM for PC gaming, but certainly will for everything out now. I just didn't understand, like, what the heck's going on. I mean, what do you think why they haven't put Windows on the Xbox yet?
Well, I thought about it a couple of times because, it would even make sense for me, because if you told me that tomorrow I could put Windows or Linux in it, which we know anyone would try to do it, definitely, to try and put Linux into a Series X. But I think there's some sort of reason behind it. I don't know if it's anything with AMD and how they supply the chips and they have a contract which, hey, you can only do this on a gaming console with a specific gaming oriented operating system or something, or they just don't want to do it because they don't want. But honestly, I would buy one just for the sole reason of doing.
So you don't have an answer. You have no clue.
I think that would be a big win for Microsoft, especially people that really wanted like a mid-level system, which is what the Series X is.
Yes.
I think it would be a win for everybody. I would get one just to make a NAS out of it, Imagine being coding out of that.
When Dan was, before the Series X came out, my brother knew he would have to try to get a new graphics card eventually. And he was just like, honestly, or a new processor. He's like, honestly, if the Series X runs Windows, I may just get a Series X, and then that's my work PC. And my gaming PC. Like, why the heck not? Unfortunately, that's not what happened. And so I guess let me specifically ask, so you haven't heard, have you ever brought that up to people at Microsoft? Like, are they planning to? Are there any plans to? Has there been literally, and I'm really curious, any mention of it? Like,
of Windows 10 on a console?
Good or bad? Yeah.
Well, no. I mean, I usually, when I talk with my contact, I never ask him directly Windows 10 on it. But he keeps saying that the software team is improving. And from what I understood there from the guy, I think there's some sort of issue with the manpower on the software team for Xbox. Because, look, here's the thing. The software team, honestly, at Microsoft, I don't know if you guys know this, but the Windows Server 2012, it's better than the 2015, okay? This is, if you go onto Azure documentation and search for operating system, they literally tell you, hey, Windows Server is twice as big as Linux. However, if you really want to use Windows, which we think we should, go for the 2012 version, please, because the the last version isn't really good. And honestly, I think there's a big problem with the Windows team, because we've seen all these code rips that have been happening recently with the security updates and the recent stuttering, which happened to me as well. Even with an RTX 380, I had stuttering in World of Warcraft. I started dying in World of Warcraft because of that, because of the stuttering. I couldn't move in the last second where I had to run away from a boss mechanic. So I honestly think there's a big problem with the Windows scheduling. Well, let's put it this way, guys. Let's put it this way. Here's the thing.
Okay.
The server team, every server team in the world doesn't have Windows Update active for Citrix, either for servers on personal computers for the staff, or even local machines for the guys at the factories or the logistics, okay, on the warehouse. Everything is tested. We have on my company we have a unique Windows team that tests every single update, and we're like 1 year behind. We're currently on the spring update from the last year.
And it's because you don't want to break everything.
It doesn't even come out of the development unit that we have. Like, we have a development unit that picks so basically you pick the OS that Microsoft gives you, and you're like, okay, so what you want to push to the local machines of your company, and we decide what we push. And the team here, they usually say, hey man, look, here's the problem, this and this, and we're still not in quality assurance, like in the assurance part before they pull to production. Like, they say the team to the production, hey, production team, you can pull this update. They're like, no man, not yet, we're still not ready, and they're working on versions from December last year. Okay.
Well, let me just throw in this reader mail now, who's from an anonymous supporter who says, hey, Tom and guest, my question is, can you please ask your pal at Bill Gates to unfuck my Windows 10 install, as his mid-April update made Duno Terminal run like choppy garbage. Thanks both for your time. I look forward to listening to the discussion, which, again, actually right before we started, it forced a Windows update, even though I told it to not run it. Luckily, I had no problems, but there's been videos that have been delayed whole days because of a random Windows update.
Oh, yeah.
Even when I've told it not to install Windows updates. So I don't know if you have any thoughts into that. It seems like you're saying you just don't think their software team isn't very good right now.
Well, honestly, whenever I think about Windows, there's one thing that really scares the hell out of me, and I told you this offline, which is the Alder Lake scheduler later this year. We'll see how that goes, because Lakefield didn't work as well, because I have a Lakefield laptop here that I tested. I have one, and honestly, I had to stop using it. It was
Have you
terrible.
tried it recently, though? I've heard they
updated it. Yeah.
The
team here, the IT team, told me, "Hey, man, we need you to go through the test once again because we usually test pilot some laptops here for the local teams.
Yeah.
And they ask us because we have a lot of workloads that we do. We do a lot of stuff, a lot of shells, a lot of not big workloads, but usually office workloads and connected to Thunderbolt docks and stuff. So we try out a lot of stuff before we send this to the new professionals that come in to work with us. And yeah, I really wanted to try it because I heard there was a BIOS update and a Windows update that fixed the schedule. But I'm really worried about Alder Lake running on Windows. I know.
So you
Linux,
haven't tested it yet again, though? With
no,
Lakefield.
I haven't, but I will, and I will get back to you on this. But I can tell you one thing: I'm really worried about the Windows team because every time they try to patch something, well, we know how it is. Honestly,
there's a big problem with early Series X performance was the state of their dev kit software.
It was basically and the OS was basically the same as the X, as the previous generation. It didn't change anything. Well, it's not like the PS5. It has the best UI as well, because we all know it needs improvement, but it works and it's something different, But I think there's a huge problem with that, especially, I don't know if any of the viewers have a Surface, but if you guys have a Surface like me and we have a Surface Book, guys, come on, let's talk about this. This is impossible. My Surface Book is stored here because it's not usable. Every time there's a BIOS update, something broke. Like the last BIOS update broke my hinge removal thing. When I press the hinge remove, I can't remove without the Intel GPU not working. It's literally, I can't use the laptop I bought with the Intel GPU. I need to use the NVIDIA. Every time I try to remove it, it just goes white screen or blank screen, basically. And there's a lot of people on Reddit with this issue.
Well, that's not a good sign for what I'm about to say, but I think what I would say is with Alder Lake, again, I keep saying, hey, look, I'm only reporting what Intel's trying to do, which Intel's trying to do a big little architecture that works well on x86, specifically on Windows, and that's a tall order. I'm not saying they'll succeed, but I am saying that is what Intel's plan is, and at the very least, if it does work, it's going to be because Intel programmed half of it for Microsoft, would be my guess. Like, there's no way that you can. I'm sure Intel's taking that driver support seriously.
Oh, yeah.
Is what I would say, because the idea that they're just throwing it to Microsoft and letting them handle it, they're not going to let them do that with their new baby. And AMD had to do that with Microsoft for EPYC and Threadripper as well. Like, just so everyone knows, AMD had to really I've heard some pretty terse words from people at AMD about how annoyed they were working with Microsoft before Zen 2 Threadripper launched. That they were like, no, we can't launch it until it works well in Windows, and you guys, God, get your act together with the drivers. I mean, if you look at the state of Threadripper now versus when it first launched on Windows, it's night and day performance differences in games.
I can back this up if you want, because my server team actually worked with the first EPYC releases, and we didn't release it on Windows. EPYC was just released for Linux machines. We just recently redeployed those older hardware machines with EPYC on Windows Server 2012, and it's much better now, because Windows Server 2012 still gets updates. Okay, guys, that's the thing that you need to understand. Despite there's a new version, everybody's using the older version because it just works better, and like I said, Microsoft recommends it, and you could check this in Azure documentation. Like I said, this is twice I'm saying this because it's there. Trust me. But yeah, I don't trust it. I don't trust Microsoft. Even Azure updates on the software side, on the stacks. There's issues, But this happens literally to every other company in the world. We have issues with that as well from our own programs. But the thing is, Microsoft consistently does this in production, and I think they got to look into their production pipeline and see what the hell is going on, because for the enterprise, they don't do this, guys. I'm seriously, they don't do this. They let us know ahead of time, hey, this has issues, don't. We're not going to pull it, but we're going to commit
That's what I hear as well, that their enterprise team's very, very, very good and doesn't screw around like this.
And going back a bit on what you said about Intel, the helping Microsoft, this is the reality, this is true. And I think a few months back you had someone from the laptop business on the podcast, and they said that Intel
someone who works at one of the biggest OEMs.
And they said that Intel helped design the cooling systems. And honestly, nothing. When I heard this for the first time on your podcast, I was like, no, of course. They helped us with Optane. We didn't really knew what we were doing with Optane, to be honest. We'll touch this later, of course. But yeah, Intel helped us. They did most of the work because we had no idea what was going on. The Azure guys didn't know as well, so they just said, hey, there's an Intel rep here. He's going to help you guys. He's a consultant, so yeah.
Well, so I guess let me see here. Where should we go next with this? I guess, yeah, let's put a pin in that. We'll come back around to like Intel versus AMD stuff. But Timo H writes in, and he asks, my simple question is, after about a decade of mainstream cloud and online play, how much effort in game development do you believe as a whole is allocated towards online, not content creation, but to the design and running of said online platforms and servers in the tens of thousands of some games? Of the overall game studio staff resources and budget, in the 2000s, game development was pretty straightforward, I think, excluding constant new tech. You just make a game with some genre formula as a big project, then ship bug fixes and move on to the next project. Now, games are services with constant online requirements, even regular content updates adding to the infrastructure. I mean, the 1993 Doom network code I consider an outlier. Only Rockstar Guru level developers can implement network play in a couple of days. Yeah, they do that pretty quickly. And a second question, if time allows, how are the economics of games shifting with this online focus as there are running costs? And people still mostly buy one-time purchases, microtransactions, or game purchase season passes. It's quite a big question, but I don't. How much of that can you speak to?
I can actually speak to both of them because actually I had the opportunity to aid some friends of mine on doing some network stuff on Azure. And they knew I worked as an architect and engineer for Azure networking, and not just the network part, but the deployment of virtual machines, the servers, basically. So for the first part of the question, there's a lot of stuff here. So let's go step by step. So the first part, back then, the servers were different, all right? You just deployed a server, and you just hoped it worked. That's the reality of it. But thankfully, the games...
they did do that all the time on the 360 and PS3 as well. They'd be like, oh, it's launch day, hope it doesn't crash when we launch the new game.
Yeah, because, there's two differences here. There's a on-premise server, and there's a cloud service. So these two are distinct. Like, the on-premise are the company who has its own data center, its own cloud team, not the cloud team, his own hardware team, his own cooling system, his own, everything server. It's like a typical data center. And then there's the cloud data center, the public cloud, like Google, Amazon, AWS, Azure. They already have all that stuff. They already have all the engineers. So you only come in and you say, hey, I want to work with you guys, deploy some servers, and we'll work with your tools at what you have. And from here, I'm going to explain a bit about Azure and games, which is essentially something...
I was going to say, let's go right into that right now from this reader mail.
Yeah, sure.
How does Azure work? How do these cloud services work? I think some people think they just have a fully built PC in a rack, and then you just, I'm buying that PC. But it's actually much more customizable and different than I think a lot of people realize. So please continue.
So to explain to the people here how it works, it's simple like this. So you create an account. Everybody can do this. Any consumer can start an account, an Azure account, and you start a subscription. In that subscription, you'll be able to pick up resources, basically. You can either do a VM, a virtual machine. You can use some of the stuff that Azure has, because Azure is a platform. It just doesn't deploy. It's not just like, hey, I'm going to Azure, and I'm going to go to Azure and deploy some virtual machines. No, it's a platform. It's a platform, and from there you can use all the tools that they have available for you. Like, for example, Azure for gaming is really cool, guys. And this is something I really love about Azure. Despite not working much with it, I've only worked a tiny bit of it, but I have experience with deploying some servers for
Azure with gaming, you mean?
Yeah. And what happens here is that they give you an offer of tools. They give you a bunch of tools, from AI, from matchmaking, from scaling capabilities. Like, for example, you're an indie game. You just released a multiplayer-based indie game. And you're like, oh, crap, this has gone viral. What do we know now? Well, we got to scale out. So you go and talk to Microsoft and say, hey, we're new to this kind of stuff. We have one engineer, and he wants to scale out all this stuff. And they come to you with documentation and talk to you and even say, hey, let's book a session, which is what I did with them. Because I never deployed game servers there, so I had to ask them, hey guys, this thing is getting a lot of people, like 500 people already playing, and I only planned it for 300 at the start, at the launch, so how am I going to do it? They're like, okay, let's book a session and we'll discuss it. And they showed me the capabilities of scaling out. Okay, so we're going to put more servers, we're going to put some more load balancers. Load balancers is a type of application within the server that allows you to share the amount of players throughout the various servers. So it's literally what the name says. It's a load balancer. So it's going to balance all the amount of players going through each server and connect them successfully.
So that they're not all put in one chip or something, right? Balancing out across your entire thing, the entire set of hardware that you've licensed, right?
Well, it's not really licensed, because if you think about it...
Yeah, I know licensed was the wrong word.
Yeah, you start a virtual machine. Like the process is like you go to the website, you start the account, you say, okay, I want to do a VM. Okay, what do you want your VM for? Well, I want databases, and each virtual machine in Azure, you have a thing called sizing. Sizing means you prepare your virtual machine for your needs. And in Azure and all the other cloud providers already have a template of machines. Like, okay, so we have the M series. The M series is for memory, and if you really want to do it some memory stuff, we got some really good ones with Optane if you want, but they're only exclusive to Intel. Okay, maybe you want some general stuff like emails and stuff. Okay, we have the D series. This is the general ones. And you start looking into it, and you're like, okay, what if I want data crunching or AI? Okay, we have some GPU ones. We have MI25 from AMD, and we have Teslas, and soon Ampere maybe. So you go and pick and start from there. They ask you, hey, what software do you want? Do you want a Windows server? Because you got to pay a license. Oh, no. Okay, Ubuntu maybe? Okay, sure. Let's go from there. And then you start doing the configurations, the networks, the DNSs. If you're starting to build an infrastructure with various servers, if not, you just start the server and there you go. You go off from there and you pay as you go, which is one of the subscription systems. You can pay it while you use it. And that's why we at some of the IT companies, we love this server. We love this idea of paying as we go because, like, for example, guys, we reach the weekends. Nobody's using sandboxes and develop machines, so we just stop them. We have a script stops every virtual machine after 7 p.m. and we save money there. That's one of the ways to save money with Azure. And of course, we don't have the HR and all the people working on the data center. You're not paying for generators. You're not paying for architects to design the warehouse where you put them. You don't pay for...
Which I want to be clear about that. When someone goes and they're like, I'm going to use Azure, the way that this happens is they say, well, here's the type, like you say, right? We're going to use x86 and we're going to run it on Windows, perhaps.
There's a
you
plan,
write the code, you send it to Microsoft, and they deploy it themselves locally.
No. It's quite the opposite.
You deploy it remotely.
They give you the virtual machine and you do whatever you want with it. Like I'll give you a quick
So you
step.
do it directly virtually.
Yeah, they give you a shell and they're like, so if you have Linux, for example, you have Ubuntu. Okay, man, here's a shell. Go at it. Okay, want disks? Okay, add disk and you pay. Simple. All right, so you got to be
smart. And they usually organize these in different racks, right? They'll say, well, what specifically, it's not like, oh, this is the Azure rack and it has everything in it. It's like, oh no, we want to run EPYC because we know our code will run on EPYC.
Yeah.
And so we're going to choose this set of processors, and then you have a rack of just all SSDs that are networked to those processors, and you're like, yeah, we want this many SSDs from that area of the server database.
Yeah.
And then we also want this much RAM, which is often stored separately in its own rack, right? And it's like, we want this much of that, this much of that. As long as it's not latency intensive, they don't have to all be right next to each other. And then that's what you pay for, right?
Exactly, but it depends. Like if you're a non-partner, they put you in a random rack. Okay, this is where the exclusive club comes in, okay? Like for example, okay, if you just want to stay with the normal people, you're not a partner, which you need a milestone to be a partner. This means X amount of servers, X amount of bill that you have per month, maybe. It depends. For my company, we're really too big, so... I think we already were Microsoft partners before because we have Office 365 and Active Directory and stuff. But the thing is, when you start a virtual machine, they tell you, okay, man, where do you want this? We have these data centers in Europe. We have these data centers in the US. Here in Asia, what do you want? And you pick them to what makes more sense to you. Like, for example, just like the game servers, when you try to connect to a multiplayer game, it will literally ask, some of the games that don't have an API and a tool for this will ask you, hey, man, where are you from? Like, for example, Apex Legends and some of the games. I know the games from Azure, they have, the game I worked on, it has an API that automatically reads your connection and says, okay, man, I'm going to pass you to the Northern European server. And this is one of the benefits.
A lot of console games still allow you to do that as well.
But this tool from the Azure allows you to auto-detect and distribute the player towards the region that makes more sense to him. You don't want a Japanese player playing
on the fly,
which is what we need for the general consumer. You know, of course, for us, we go and I want to see the best one right next to me. That's what I want to do. But yeah, for the general consumer, that's what it does. And this is the type of things that Azure benefits most from the gaming standpoint. stack. They have a gaming stack. They have a matchmaking gaming stack. And when I did it for the first time, I was really surprised. I was asking my team, like, hey guys, how you want to do with matchmaking? Do you want to do like SPMM, which is a skill based, like the guy with the highest skill plays against the other guys with the highest skill, which is what happens in Call of Duty? Or do you want to do like whatever it is, like back in the day? Okay, I'm just gonna throw into a pool of players, actually, like in Gears 2, when it didn't have any concrete matchmaking rules. And this is one of the tools that Azure gives you. And you're like, and I was like, okay, so I don't have to do matchmaking. That's perfect. I'm just gonna select what we want, basically. And then you go to the AI. It asks you, hey man, what do you want to do with AI? Do you want us to deploy some type of ghosts, like Forza, for example? This technology, as far as I go on my mind, I think that's the first time that it was used. It was in Forza, at least to make sense in Azure when they debuted it. I think it comes from Forza. Not sure, but I'll let someone correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, Azure allows you to give you all these tools, all the load balancers, matchmaking stuff. There's a lot of tools that you can use. And when you try to make a game server, it asks you, hey, do you want a real-time multiplayer server or do you want a turn-based game server? Do you want some analytics? It has all these kind of tools, which...
and it's all done, so much of it is done for you. And I mean, certainly you could write this yourself and run it yourself.
Oh,
but
yeah.
You know that Microsoft backs these things up, has redundancy, can move you between different locations if, like, oh, it turns out our player base is mostly here. And this is just talking about gaming. Like, the data redundancy thing, I think, for companies is probably the most important thing, that you know Microsoft isn't going to F this up. And I can say, working for the previous company I worked for after General Motors, which is a supplier to them, that they ran their own servers and they had so many frickin' issues, right? Yeah. That are you going to run servers, I mean, as well? You know, I would even go as far as like, let me ask you, like, what is the point of an on-site server anymore? I know that was something we were going to talk about.
Yeah, there's a big point, actually. I'll give you an example. At my company, we have a barcode scanning at the warehouses where the trucks come in and they remove the packages from there, and they have to be scanned to go into processing, for example, for coffees and materials and stuff. And so for us, we can put it on the cloud. First of all, it's a place where the cloud, the closest to it's 8 ATMS around that. Yeah, so that's a lot. That's a lot of latency. I know for people at home, they're like, yeah, but I play with ATMS. Yeah, but you're not running a business, right? You're not making money on the fly. So for us, we need the barcode scanning to be done in less than a second. This is critical. We have an automatic machine, and so we had to build an on-premise with a vendor, in this case Lenovo. We work with Lenovo, and we deployed a couple of machines there with Optane. And what it does, we have an automatic bar scanning machine already. It's not a person anymore with a PDA. It's really a machine. The guys come in with the trucks, and there's an automatic machine that takes the packages out, and the packages start passing through the barcode scanning. They beep, 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 and all of these have to be done in under 1 second. If it hits the 1 second threshold, I'm alerted on my email. I get an email saying, hey, we're getting a 1 second delay. This means that instead of doing 500 packages a minute, we're doing 350, and business doesn't like that. We tried with cloud, and it was 3 seconds per each package.
Right. So when it comes to latency intensive stuff, that's important. And then also I would say, like, well, if it's sensitive data and you only trust yourselves, I mean, I suppose you could argue that. Although I know that these cloud providers have ways that they encrypt the data so they can't even look at your own data. So I don't know I mean, how much of that is a concern, the security aspect for having your own servers?
So this is always a big discussion. This is actually one of the most, this is one of the big questions we get from new people who never worked on cloud. And they're like, okay, I'm joining the company. So what I'm going to do? Okay, you're going to be a junior cloud engineer. Okay, but you know, I've read throughout the web that public clouds have a lot of information and that can be stolen. Well, first of all, Microsoft wouldn't want that because that means the company would move out of the service, first of all. And second of all, the analytics that they have on the system, it's up to you. It's not like on Windows where they tell you, oh, so you want telemetry out? Oh, yeah, sure. Well, it's still there. Obviously. They're just not in such a big way as before. But on the enterprise, they treat us like kings, like I usually say, you know. They're like, okay, so what do you want to run on this server? Okay, you want to do this software? Okay. So can we run some analytics for hardware? And I'm like, from hardware, what does he want to read? And some of my colleagues told me once I started, well, this is for the Azure nodes, to get some signs that there's SSD wear or some SSD issue. And I was like, okay, but shouldn't they get some additional data? No, this is only reading from the BIOS, from the board at the data center. It's not reading anything off the disk. It's completely prohibited to read anything off the disks. I think it's sort of encrypted. I'm not sure, but I had some encryption issues with some of my data. It wasn't flowing from one server to another. So I think there's a kind of layer of security. But honestly, this has never been a topic that we discuss within the company, especially as a Microsoft partner. If you're a Microsoft partner, you're a bit treated differently. Like I told you, you have different places in the rack where you get. This isn't public knowledge per se, nor is it. It's not discussed. They don't tell you that you're in a special rack, but you get special treatment. You definitely see it. Like last week, I had a node failure on one of the SSDs.
Well, so like, what would you say though? Would you say security is a major concern, or is that really something you don't need to worry about when there's end-to-end encryption and they don't even control the keys to access the info in it? Do you trust that? That's because I've seen like the lengths. Specifically, I've looked at the lengths like AWS and Google go through. They have like rotating private keys they don't have access to. Seems like there's a lot of effort they at least say they go through so they can't access your data.
Well, this exists. Like, for example, when we have our own private keys, they don't have it. Like, if you lose it, you lose it. Right. That's why Azure Key Vault.
That's a choice you can make.
Yeah, that's why they have a tool called Key Vault. It's like KeePass for those who don't know what KeePass is. It's a storage container for your password, just like LastPass, but for enterprise basically. But it doesn't have a search box for some reason in 2021. But yeah, and you put there the stuff, and they can help you if you delete it. We had one situation where you can do a recovery point for the Key Vault. Like a junior guy deleted one of our Key Vaults, and when you add a recovery point from it. But when we asked Microsoft, like we asked them, hey guys, we lost the recovery point. What can we do? Well, we can help you, man. That's on you. We don't save this. We don't save it. And
so you kind of think that is kind of a newbie question then. That is like you don't think security really is an issue as long as you control your private keys.
Yes and no, because at the end of the day, it depends on your infrastructure. Like for example, on my infrastructure, security is the biggest reason. I'm not the security head. I'm not the head of security in my company, but the head of security is like, dude, you can't do anything. Okay, so you do SAP or you do EPYC workloads, or for what? For emails. Okay, then you only have access to emails. And this starts at the professional level, at the person level, and from there you go up. And the more like it's a public cloud at the end of the day. So if you want to make sure that the security is your topmost requested thing at your company, you're not going to do it on a public cloud, obviously, right? Like for government contracts, you don't run it on public cloud.
So you still do think then that there's still a reason to have security concerns, though, just not unless it's like really, really, really sensitive stuff and you have the money.
Yeah, and like they give you the tools. Like if you have a security expert, an Azure security expert, and you have networking guys. Honestly, my biggest problem with security is the way it's people from the internet being able to connect to my servers. That's the biggest security issue I have with my servers. When I'm doing an architecture for the servers, the first thing I come up is, okay guys, I talk to the network team and I tell them, hey guys, only these 3 servers connect to this one. There's only communication within the internal network, not external, the public internet. Okay, what if you want to do Google search? There's no Google search on this machine. So there's no access to the external internet. And to connect to our servers on Azure, you need to use a VPN, obviously. That's the first line of defense. And there's many others. I can tell you that 99.9% of my company doesn't actually connect to anything directly. And there's app gateways that use masks to hide the real URLs and the real IPs. So you can never know the host names or the IPs of said machines.
Right. Let's just admit it, nobody wants to pay full price for those Windows 10 professional keys. But shopping for deals on eBay can be a risky process that wastes your time, which is why you should simply just go to cdkoffers.com. cdkoffers.com offers an assortment of Windows software products, Steam games, Origin games, Uplay games, and even games on Xbox and PlayStation. Help out Moore's Law is Dead and save yourself some money by using offer code BROKENSILICON for 25% off all Windows software and Die Shrink for 3% off everything on the website. Use CDK offers today. All right, so moving forward, Jessica writes in and says, how would you say Azure or Microsoft is differentiating itself in cloud against AWS, Google, etc., and beyond? its history with enterprise. Specifically in cloud gaming, I'm curious, what does xCloud do differently compared to Stadia and Luna, as far as you can tell?
Okay, so this is two-step questions. For the first step, I think Azure allows the companies that want certain tools to use them and not have to go and create themselves or use open source ones, because they already, like I said before, there's for gaming. For example, the ones I said for gaming, it's there is for every type of enterprise workload out there. There's tools. They give you Power BI, they give you Azure Data Factory, which is for internal teams to run some data pipelines throughout the servers and interfaces. This is more interfaces kind of conversation with the app. But for example, for gaming, it's like I said, they give you APIs for a lot of stuff. So you already have your work done. Like when I did that game server for that game, I didn't do anything besides deploying a virtual machine and pointing it towards the game. The game team only said, okay, hey man, everything is working, even leaderboards. The only thing we need to do is do you want the leaderboard to be like skill points based? Like what do you put on the column there, And that's they give you the tools for a lot of stuff. It makes the job easier, and I think more.
So there's much more assistance and more. I don't know if this is the way to put it, but like detailed tools versus the other competitors.
Oh yeah, but then again, Microsoft has Xbox, right? So it makes sense. Like the meeting I had with Microsoft for this server, I said it was someone from 1010. I knew the name I searched his name because I usually search people's names from teams that I don't know, right, on the internet. It was someone from 1010 who told me, hey, so you can do some interesting stuff with AI from our APIs. And this is all public documentation, guys. You can just search Azure Game Services and you can spend the whole night reading. Like I said before, this is all public info there. And at the end of the day, it depends on where you want to deploy. Because of price. Price is the deciding factor, but also stock for the chips. For example, I deploy only Intel, and to me, Azure has been pretty good. For AMD, it's been a bit complicated. Sometimes you have to wait for some of the virtual machines, especially during the pandemic, with obviously with everything that's happening at TSMC and everything. But I never had any stock issues, to be honest, besides EPYC. For that matter. And comparing Azure with the rest of the public clouds, Google, for example, it's really good. They have a lot of documentation, but they don't connect. For example, for my company, it doesn't make sense because we already use Office workloads and Office 365 from ever before. So it would make sense for us to migrate from a on-premise data center to a cloud data center from Microsoft. Not just because we were already partners before them, but because they had a lot of good people there who we already knew, and they said, hey, you can come to the cloud if you want, and we have all this documentation, we can help you through the procedures, we actually have deals with SAP to help you for those types of workloads. So it was a no-brainer for us to move in because we were already in Microsoft foundations, okay? So for a lot of companies, like in the US, it's cheaper to go AWS. I know a lot of companies to go AWS.
So Azure costs more typically, but has more tools.
But then again, it depends. Like disks, it's more expensive on Azure. That's definitely, if you look at the tables, disks on Azure, they're the high performance ones, which is the ones I only use.
Oh, but for like processing.
For processing,
AWS
it's a bit better. For processing, it depends. For AMD, it's cheaper on the AWS. But on Intel, it's a bit more expensive on AWS compared to Azure. But then again, these prices are relative because if you're a partner, they do special prices depending on the amount of machines. Like, I'll give you an example. I have a current project that I'm doing 16 machines. So since I'm deploying 16 machines in a row, they gave me like 2 for free, for example. But this is all Microsoft controls, all right? This is nothing. If you go to AWS and you say, hey, I want to start a project. Okay, you want to do a project with us? Sure, you're a big company. How many projects you want to deploy? 250. Okay, 250. I don't know, man. That's small to be a partner. So here's the price table. And then you go into Azure, which you were already a partner before, and they say, hey, you know what? 50% off of that is gone then. Now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, too, because in automotive, some companies and suppliers had way better prices the higher you went up. A company I worked for specialized pretty much in mid-tier pricing and some of the higher tier, but we weren't going to compete with mom-and-pop shops on dirt cheap small amounts of servers, nor could we compete with the biggest companies, and like manufacturing tens of millions a year necessarily.
It makes sense. And the second reason for us, at least on the perspective level from us, was that most of us, not me, I wasn't there at the start, but when the project started 2 years ago, they already had people with top knowledge from cloud, from Azure. Mm-hmm. Of course, they knew a couple of AWS, but they were masters and experts at Azure that they had already before when it started. So it was a no-brainer. It always depends at the end of the day of the type of people you have in your company, what the management wants, because it's the management that decides, right? and the people that you have, because at the end of the day, if you go to a service that nobody knows, that means it's time to get everybody up on learning how to use the tool, and that's a deciding factor.
You touched on it. I want to move into this part of the conversation. Quick Jumper writes in and says, how long does it usually take AMD to fulfill delivery on products? I read somewhere that Intel delivers it in a matter of like 2 weeks. And with AMD, customers are often waiting 3 months. Mm-hmm. What is your experience? Let's talk about that and why you would use Intel over AMD or vice versa.
Okay, so first of all, it starts with the workload. When you decide to deploy a virtual machine on the cloud, it depends what you want. For example, for my main workload, it's SAP. There's only Intel for me. There's no choice. The only decision I have is I'm either picking Skylake, Broadwell, Cascade Lake, or Ice Lake. Because my workload binaries only work on Intel. Honestly, I have nothing to say about that because it works really well. It's amazing. Optane, like I said, it's a godsend. For us, it's amazing because our ANA database works in memory. So of course, Optane would be the best choice for us. But for our mixed workloads, which are neutral, I call them neutral workloads. It's what we usually call them. You can decide what it is, and there's 2 factors here. First of all, is stock. So is this VM ready for us today? Because we need it today. Okay, there is 500 of them. Maybe not. Maybe 250. And you talk to your engineer and you say, hey, do you want 250 Intel and 250 AMD? And he's like, no, man, I want the same product because I have to deploy them. They give the machines to me, and I have to start the deployment process, the file system process, the software installation process. For example, for Red Hat, the type of workload that you do on Linux Red Hat, you have to install the appropriate libraries for it. Okay, so this is the most important factor. It depends on your workload. And on the pricing, again, obviously AMD is cheaper. We switched most of our neutral workloads to it, around 33 to 37% are AMD, and we made insane savings.
It's not like you hate AMD or some stupid thing.
Man, I don't. I wish I could put SAP on it. I would get a really nice bonus at the end of the year. If I could go to management and say, hey guys, we saved $300K from switching from Intel to AMD. Oh, that's great. Here's a bonus for all your team. But no, sadly, it isn't the truth, and my workloads are Intel only, and I suffered quite a lot with Intel. But touching on the support, which is what the company, what the reader mail said, this is the important factor here. Is it's a no-brainer that Intel has the best support from all the CPU side companies. But the reality is that we gotta look at it from a realistic approach, okay? Here's the thing. Intel is twice as big. They've been doing this ever since I was born.
Yeah.
Even before I was born. And Intel is really knee-deep inside Microsoft, and there's a lot of context. Like, I'll give you an example. When the first time I deployed Optane, I heard about Optane. I knew what it would do on the consumer side, but I never knew how crazy this was on the server side. Like, guys, you have no idea. The thing is literally instant. It's instant. Everything you do on the server, it's instant. We only use it for production ones because it's the most expensive product of any public cloud. Optane is really only for production services, okay? This is the really important part here. It's really expensive. Not all companies can afford this. I know companies that run the Optane budget for all their systems. So here's the thing on Optane. There's that. It's really expensive. It's really amazing for if you're running an in-memory database or in-memory workload. And for AMD side, they don't offer anything on that. I'm not sure of any other type of workloads that use so extensively Optane, besides AI and some big data stuff that usually uses a data bank like a database to be used on in-memory, SQL maybe, but it depends on the type of workloads that you have. For us, we need the best. Simply that, okay, Ice Lake is out, no issues, no bugs, okay, it works with Intel, okay, Azure supports it, okay, let's go, let's deploy. Let's scale out. If we need it, let's do it. There's no questions about it, there's no budget for us because our mission is really critical, so we need the best of the best.
And for you, right, for these operations, it's Optane because you're putting so much of the stuff in memory. But whereas for AMD, if you just need to handle more basic stuff, it's like, of course you want to use AMD. They're far cheaper and more efficient.
And the thing is, we actually had a couple of apps that, and I'm going to tell you this because this is the reality of it. And even the Server Engineer podcast before said this. We have a couple of legacy apps, not SAP, they're natural world. Some old timesheets and some older stuff that we were really scared to move to AMD because we didn't know the behavior. So we tried and it didn't work. And the first thing we tried to up to the management saying, hey guys, this isn't working. I know you guys only need this to consult for the audits and for the courts when you need them. And it's documents that you need to save, basically. So what we did was we put them on cold storage. We moved them back to Skylake. We asked for Skylake because it was the cheapest option and the service turned off. We just turn it on when someone from the other side of the world says, hey, man, I need these documents for court, for the AX. Can I remove them? Can you prepare the system for it? And I just lift the system up and they remove it and I turn it off. So sometimes it doesn't work. But what we did was, and this is the important part, it was cheaper for us to rewrite the application that everybody was using in Brazil, for example, and deploy it on AMD servers.
Right. And that's how much cheaper AMD is getting. That's why.
Yeah. And for example, we saved 50K on that, for example. Just on that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that on the one hand, there's a lot of programs that you can't just move from Intel. There are some that if you put in the legwork, you can, and that's why it's the thing I've been talking about since the start of my channel. It's so important not for AMD to be 20% better than Intel, not for them to be 30%. They need to be over twice as good so that it's cheaper to rewrite everything and move to AMD. And it is that much better right now, right? And that's why it's imperative that that's why it's imperative AMD keeps a 2x lead over Intel's server efficiency for at least a few years so they can get that, war chest of support in server so that they can support their company. Because if they don't get to like 15, 20% of server and keep rolling competing with Intel after that, then Intel can kind of just bulldoze them again. And I don't want that. I want competition. And
honestly, at the enterprise level, it's a bit different because the consumer says, okay, I want people to use this in enterprise as well. They should praise AMD and everything. But, I'm going to be honest, in production machines, we don't have AMD because of if something happens on the hardware, it takes 2 to 3 weeks. Because the first thing when you open a ticket at Microsoft and you say, okay, I'm having this issue, the first thing they ask you, and if you pick the category of hardware, the problem is hardware because you look at the logs and saw, okay, this binary is not compatible with this CPU or there's some sort of issue that can be worked. It's a side effect of something, a latency from transcoding or something. And we open a ticket to them and say, okay, there's this issue. Okay, I'm gonna pass you this to someone that works with EPYC. And we go there. We wait 3 days. He answers and says, okay, man, can you try this and this and this? Well, we went this process. We did a week. We did 2 weeks. And at the 3rd week, he answered, look, we did all the troubleshooting. This looks like a support, right? There's support chat from the consumer side. We did all we could, so we're going to pass it to AMD. But there's a lot of traffic going in right now because a lot of people requested EPYC. So you guys are going to need to wait in line despite being partners, which you don't stay in line when you're a partner. There's a Microsoft guy coming in and, hey, man, what's up? Let's fix this.
He actually shows up and fixes it.
Yeah, but for example, for AMD, they have a lot of engineers, but it's not enough. It's not enough. And I think this is a support problem. This support problem happens here. Nobody's going to want a production machine that you have to wait 5 to 7 days to get support if it's a microcode issue, okay? Because the platform is new. The platform is really new. And honestly, at the end of the day, it depends on the packages that you buy. If my company says, hey, we need 500 servers right here, right now, and if they're stock from Intel, I'll just take Intel. Because, guys, at the end of the day, here's the thing. We need to get them done. By 6, it has to be done. It has to be running, and no issues at all. So that's why I'll keep going with Intel. And like I previously said, I work directly with some Intel guys from Azure side, some guys from Microsoft that I don't know if they were directly from Intel. Some of them were, but the recent ones have been people that maybe they hired. Because they're directly from Microsoft. And what they tell me, hey man, I had this issue back in '98 with this type of application, so we can fix this. And there was one of the issues that we had with Optane, where they're like, you know what, we're going to need to scale this because this is the first time issue we ever seen related to this. We know this could be possible. This was the issue we had on Optane, which was the buffers of the database weren't 100% full. and they were like at 87%. They weren't passing 87%, and so they scaled the ticket up for Intel. And this was on a Thursday. On the Monday, hey guys, we have the patch ready. We're gonna deploy it just for you guys. You try it out, and if it fixes your issue, and if we see more clients with the issue, we're gonna do a public commit to push this update through all the customers using Optane that are having this issue.
Right, and from what I hear talking, and of course by now, I've had the one guy I call the server engineer on like 3 times. I have another. I've had an EPYC person recently who's, I mean, God, he was on like 2 months ago or something, and then another person you're like what, the 4th, 5th server person to come on Broken Silicon. One thing that I do hear consistently though is that AMD is getting better faster than people expected in their ability to support both in sales and IT support for their products. Right? Would you say that AMD is getting better over time, or are they just kind of swamped right now?
Oh no, it's improving a lot. It's vastly improving. I don't think
that's what I hear.
Yeah. I think it depends, because if you're someone from Azure and your partner level is different from you work with AWS or other platform, I think we all gonna have different experiences. I know the people with on-premise. This is from a guy I know who works on-premise and he only runs EPYC. He did a switch 6 months ago, fully EPYC Rome. And you guys must be wondering, why the hell are these guys always saying Rome? Isn't there more EPYCs? Yeah, there is, but it's the most stable one. It's the one AMD has the most documentation about. It's the most that they know their stuff. It's the most that a lot of people on Stack Overflow and some other forums say, hey, it works with this. Because when we deploy, we do the same thing as you guys when you have an issue on your local machine. We Google search it. There's no other way. I can open a ticket, but I can't wait for the ticket. I have to fix it now. So I Google search it and I see it. And there's a lot of benefits. Going back to the on-premise person I know, he has EPYC and he has Rome in it, and he's really happy about it. And he says every week talks to AMD. And I was like, yeah, I had a bit of different experience. And he's like, yeah, maybe AMD, and makes sense that they treat on-premise customers differently because they've been doing this for years. And the cloud stuff, it's new to them. I don't think they deployed a lot of cloud stuff before besides GPU solutions back at the Athlon days, because it was the early start of the cloud, and obviously Intel had like 90% of market share. I honestly don't think people should bring doom to Intel on the enterprise, because I know a lot of companies who aren't moving. We know a lot of companies who aren't moving. Talked to a lot of engineers who said, man, we're not moving because we're really happy with Cascade Lake. Personally, at my level, guys, I had a lot of issues with Spectre and Meltdown during the last few years, and there's performance I've never got it back. There's performance on the legacy application.
Which I'm not sure how much there's to say about that, except that you can also confirm what's been discussed on Broken Silicon with multiple guests.
Oh, yeah.
Security issues were huge. They continued to be huge. They cost you a lot of money. It was still easier to just build bigger servers, unfortunately, than switch to AMD right away.
Yeah, and one thing that we did with this, we took a different strategy. So what we did was like, okay, so are these servers used usually, weekly, monthly? Where are they? Okay, this one is monthly. Okay, it's going to stay on Skylake. It's only going to be turned twice a month. We'll leave it there because it's cheaper, and we don't need more than one user at a time. Okay, then we'll scale it out. We'll scale it in for the smallest server possible, and that's it. We have machines on Broadwell. We have machines on Skylake. We're not moving them because Azure, Microsoft has them on their rack, and they're like, hey man, this is €1 a month. I'm like, yeah, that's what I want.
Okay.
Cheap. Of course, for the machines that we use daily, that we still use daily from back then from Skylake and Broadwell, they got upgraded. We move a lot of stuff to Cascade Lake. Cascade Lake was a really good release, guys. Despite a lot of people complaining about it on the enterprise, we're really happy right now with it, especially on SAP. We're really happy. There's some huge, not huge, but there's some kind of high CPU spikes on it. But it has been confirmed that it will be fixed in Ice Lake. We're currently waiting Ice Lake deployment. We only tested one thus far because they're not all fully available as we want. Because since it's a template on Azure, you got to pick from the template. So we got to be really sure. And we only use memory-based ones for SAP. So we're waiting on Skylake to be certified because these machines have to be certified. Again, it's SAP workload is an exclusive ERP workload that works across HR, logistics, warehouse, whatever, financial. It's success factors, which is for HR, for timesheets. This is very critical stuff. Okay, if I lose one of these servers, I have financial guys on top of me saying, hey, I need to close the month. These servers need to be up. No questions. So that's why we always go with what makes sense. We like Cascade Lake because it has the amount of documentation when compared to Skylake and Broadwell, but doesn't have any security issues. Did we lose performance compared to Skylake? Maybe because Intel didn't evolve a lot in these last few years. But is it safer than Skylake and Broadwell? Hell yeah, it is. So that's why we're going to keep doing it. And of course, Intel has adapted the price. We're not seeing the amount of prices that we were seeing before, even on SAP, even on exclusive Intel workloads, which again I have to reinforce because it's exclusive. No, you can't install it. The binaries don't work. Period. You are either Intel or Intel. That's it. And you're not going to switch ERP because it's more expensive to get out of an ERP system to go to Oracle to use whatever than just stay with what you are and need it. So for me, honestly, I want to see Intel compete on both the enterprise and the consumer. For enterprise, what I want is more security at hardware level. And I think Ice Lake touch on that, and I'm really happy with it.
That's why people are so excited about Ice Lake. I think people just, again, it's like, no, but, well, and you know what, actually, and something else to touch on, too, that I thought of just now is, you know, when it comes to the concept of being easier to scale out, to not switch to AMD, people need to remember how many people are just using Azure, AWS. It's like, it's not like you handled all of the scaling out at your company. It's like we have the code, we handle it, we lost performance. Microsoft's bothering with making the servers bigger and adding new ones to like Spain or something. They're the ones doing this. Not you. You just worry about the code for a lot of your programs. Not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them. And so it's like, yeah, I guess let's just buy more Azure servers, right? Like, because it is much easier when you're not literally building the servers. It's the point of using the cloud is they're handling all the hardware for you.
Yeah, there's failures, you know. That's something I've experienced in the past year, which is when I got experience with most of the failures, and it's pretty cool what they do with the public cloud. So one weekend I was out for holidays, and I came back on Monday, and I saw that one node, because in Azure the data center works by nodes, so there's a node of SSDs, right? So if one node fails in Eastern Europe, what are you going to do? Right? So what happens is that Azure and Microsoft automatically switch the node. They switch you, they copy you, they make a clone, an instant clone, because there's always a clone ready. They're doing snapshots every minute if it's necessary. You can kind of control that. And they pass you on to another node, and they start you the service automatically, and they send you an email and open a ticket saying, hey man, we had a local hardware issue on this data center. It was not just you affected, but this SSD on this row on the data center, like for example L4, which means fourth floor on the L side of the room, all of them got affected, and we switched you to the M node. You should expect like 0.3% or 0.1% latency delay, for example, but we should be able to fix this up. And then once there's an hardware local guy going there physically, they say, hey, a real human went there and switched the node, so we sent you back. You're back on where you were. And this is the type of support you don't have to worry, because I remember my bosses, they usually speak about this on lunchtimes, because I'm much younger. I'm less than 40 years old, so I don't have a lot of experience with data center. I worked at
less than 40 years old, not less than 4 years.
No, 40. I'm less than 30. And these guys here that work with me, they're 16, 15. They were at the data center. They're like, man, you saw that issue on Monday? Remember when it was back in the day? They called you at 3 a.m. You had to get your code, go to the data center, pass through the biometrics authentication process, go and talk to the security guard, show them that you're not a fraud guy, get in there, get your proper clothes to get in there. Be careful with the cooling system to not get you freezed or anything. Go through there. Deactivate the rack, take the disk off, then do all the software side with your laptop. Yeah, and it's like 7 a.m. and guys, we're done. Now it's instant. So yeah, at the end of the day, it saves a lot of pains for everybody, and you can work from home. Which on my department, we all work from home. We're 100% home office even before the pandemic. So my team is we're mobile, and that's where I think we're gonna touch the next subject on the ARM laptops.
Well, so actually, a reader mail that I want to throw in now is AC666 writes in and says, with my uncle recently doing up his home networking and setting up a Plex server to watch content on his off hours, he travels a lot. What are your views on people hosting their own private clouds? Is this something you endorse? Is it something you do yourself? And again, thanks for coming on. Keep up the great work, guys.
Thanks for the question. And honestly, yes, I have a Plex server at home. I have a Synology NAS at home, and I use it as a Plex server, obviously, for stuff and for photos as well and videos from holidays and stuff. I have my own cloud at home. What I usually recommend to people is that you should definitely go this way because due to data encryption and stuff, it's there's nothing better than our own personal cloud, but just make sure it's not connected to the external internet. That's my advice. That's what I do. I have a Synology one. I'm really happy with it, especially with the 4K HDR encoding. The new ones are really great. I really wish it used AMD, but it uses Intel, and I got it. But it was a good price, so it is what it is. I still run Intel at home. I have an 8700K, which I still haven't upgraded.
But you say you want to upgrade.
Oh, I do. I'm very excited for what comes next from Zen. Like, I want to see competition. I really wish SAP had workloads with AMD. Because if that happens, man, tomorrow I'll switch everything, And that's the thing. I can just keep switching. There's no problem for me because if it's cheaper, it's always cheaper for me to hire someone from any consultant from Asia or something, or even India, and make them do the work and switch. And I can still be busy with my Intel machines and have someone working for the AMD machines.
Well, let me move on then to a few more technical questions before I think maybe we round it out with gaming stuff again. QH Freddy writes in and says, tangent to the Optane topic. I've recently been doing some research on serial memory interfaces like GenZ, CXL, and I think most importantly, AMI. One of the things that I always saw brought up by the IBM guys with respect to AMI or OMI is that you can basically attach whatever memory you want through the buffer chip. This is particularly in contrast to the present implementation of Optane, which basically just uses DDR4 bus, so you need to dedicate memory channels to use the Optane DIMMs, thus losing DRAM capacity and bandwidth. How does this affect the guys speccing out the servers for the data centers? Do you think that would get a big advantage out of AMI and having a DIMM with, say, 256 gigabytes of DRAM backed by 1 terabyte of persistent memory relative to what Intel is currently offering? Maybe you'd like to talk more about the opportunities you see with serial memory interfaces in the future, be it in large data centers or at a smaller scale, memory disaggregation, maintenance aspects, separate upgrade cycles for memory and compute, more flexibility with memory types, and in-near memory compute. And he does put a question mark at the end there.
Yeah. So I had this question beforehand, so I was actually very happy to hear someone talk about OMI because I only know 3 people in this world who ever discussed this with me. So it's always an interesting topic. I do have IBM systems with me. I manage a couple of them, but the reality is that there's 2 topics here. The first one is to get people who know how to handle this. I'm a very basic user with IBM. I know ASX and I work a bit with it as well. But the situation here is that on the cloud, on Azure, where we are right now. So the thing is, we have mostly x86 there, and that's where we decided to go for our workloads. So that was the deciding factor. We still have these machines here. Some of them are for government contracts, which I won't go about. Some of them are just the normal old machines that are still being upgraded by IBM guys. This is stuff on premise, obviously, and this is stuff that we don't touch. We don't have the capabilities or the knowledge for this. We have some consultants from IBM, people in their 50s, who go there and do all the work. They sometimes grant us some new machines that haven't been announced publicly, and they say, "Hey, check it out, huh? 2 seconds faster." And yeah, sure. But for the workload that we have, this is just for This is just for viewing. We're not editing files here. This is just some old files that we have on PowerPC. This is an old architecture that not old. It's current and it's still very supported and certified by SAP. But we moved on to x86 because it's where most of our team has knowledge, and it's where most of our management wants us to go. Because if we are to hire someone, the first thing we're going to ask is, do you know Unix, for example? Do you know x86? Do you know Intel? Do you know AMD? Oh yeah, sure, definitely. You grew on it on the last 30 years. But if you grew on ASX and IBM, it's a different picture, and that's more of the older guy. And these servers are usually only used for maintenance or for data viewing, basically. But the question is very interesting because I love the memory. I saw some of the new stuff and we have some of the current stuff, and they sometimes output 180 gigabits per second. It's really cool stuff. I wish it was more widely spread and something that we use on a lot of workloads. But the reality is that it's just not very accepted besides certain specific stuff, usually high clearance stuff, because IBM has a lot of security and they're really good at what they do. So this is usually stuff that it's just sitting there in the corner and nobody interacts with it, which is sad because I really love that architecture. I work with someone, my boss, he's very, he really loves this type of machines, the type of performance that it has. But the issue is being power hungry and not being widely available for all types of workloads. But he has some really good insights into this, and he usually tells me, hey man, I wish this was more widely used, because have you seen the capabilities of this? And he once asked me, hey, do you know anything with IBM? And I was like, yeah, the PlayStation 3, right? He's like, yeah, exactly. Do you know why the ship was like that? And he was like, oh, what, a server ship? Yeah, it was a server ship at first.
Yep, just like with the Series X. I really think people are missing the parallels between the Series X and the PS3. There are quite a few.
Oh, yeah, but that ship was insane. The only shortcut there was the
PS3 had
GPU.
more. So I always say problems.
Yeah, it was a really sick ship. My boss usually tells me that ship was actually used in a couple of systems back then, from the early 2000s, where SAP was used widely there. Not anymore, sadly, but the new one, I've seen the new one. I don't touch it much because I'm very limited on ASX. Because the reality is that every time I work with something, it's Unix. I wish I had more experience with it. I know the basic stuff, the maintenance stuff. I don't know how to deploy. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing, but it's different because it's ASX. But yeah, the memory stuff, it's very cool, very cool. And honestly, I'm very excited for where Optane goes next. I'm really worried about what it happens to it because, for example, on Intel, for the enterprise, it's really good and people love it and people with money go for it. There's no doubt about it. But since we lost Optane on the consumer side, the enterprise also shakes a bit because
they stopped making, just so everyone knows, Intel stopped making Optane drives that were in SATA, and I believe they may have even stopped the NVMe versions as well. That basically consumer Optane's gone. It's going to be used for sticks. And although, again, with that Broken Silicon with Dave Eggleston, it's like, well, yeah, but the ultimate goal is to use Optane, I think, with CXL.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So I think in the
that's
short
the reality
term,
of it, yeah. So when we talk with Microsoft people who are very deep into hardware and all this kind of stuff, they usually tell us a roadmap. Hey, here's what's coming for x86. Here's what we're looking at ARM. And for memory, I'm like, hey guys, so I'm M-based. When I say something M-based on Azure, it means it's memory-based. So my question is always pointed towards people who work with memory. And they ask me, I saw from your insights here that you work with Optane on SAP, and you're actually one of the few customers who use it. We would like to know your insights. And I'm like, man, this is instant. I can do a database recovery on production systems in 2.5 minutes. With a really good solution, a really good backup solution that we have from an external partner. And it's, look, I don't even have time to make a sandwich in case of a production system goes down. And for me, I'm really happy with it. It's pricey, yes. That's why I said it's only using production systems. So we have to cut corners for non-critical systems. But I'm very curious where we go, especially the next architecture for Intel with DDR5. I think that's what we're looking for the most. We know it's going to be a bit pricey, but we're ready to be early adopters.
It is, but they're going to use it. Some people I'm seeing are doubting it. No, guys, Alder Lake's coming out. It's going to use DDR5. There will be DDR4 options, but there's going to be DDR5 options as well, expensive or not. They're making it. It's coming, guys. Yeah, don't doubt it.
We know from meetings that we previously had with vendors for on-premise, where we asked them, hey, so DDR5 is kind of happening. And they're like, no, it's already happening. We already have the chips. We have the chips from Micron. That's what they told us. And we're doing tests. We're seeing what makes sense. We're talking to Intel. I don't know about AMD. This vendor I talked to only sells us Intel chips. And what he told me it was, it's ready for enterprise. We're planning to deploy them at the end of the year for early adopters. They always say we suggest you to test only on sandboxes machines, but we'll simulate on a production environment, because if I can get the full potential of DDR5 out of our servers, and if Intel does provide Ice Lake with DDR5 or something else entirely, which I hope they do, because we really need a jump. I'm going to be honest. we would need a job. If it wasn't for Optane in the last 3 years.
I think you're waiting for Sapphire Rapids if you want it in servers, man.
Yeah, Sapphire Rapids is something we've been discussing at Azure meetings with Microsoft, and they said that it's coming. That we should look forward to it because they know they're going to lose our service as well if we decide to go to Amazon.
All hands on deck for Sapphire Rapids right now, by the way, I didn't tell, just so everyone's listening. Like, all hands are on deck for Sapphire Rapids and Alder Lake. That is all they care about to a certain, basically, right now.
I know they're going to be widely available because they told me because I usually tell them, hey guys, here's the thing, we need more performance. We always need more performance, and it's just not from a memory side. I can tell you that on weekends, especially on early mornings, we have a lot of background stuff going on. And there's some times in Cascade Lake where it hits 95 and 97, and we're on the highest spec vCore machine, So, I mean, I want to be idle 90% of my time if I could, on the CPU cycles.
Yeah.
But the reality is that it's impossible right now. In these last 5 years, it just means, and this is the reality of a lot of companies, especially in SAP. This is what we discuss. We discuss a lot this optimization. This has been the word for the last 3 years, optimization, because there's no CPU upgrades. Okay, so there isn't much. So we just guys, there's no junior developers here. Every time a junior developer makes a line, I want to make sure it gets reviewed. This is the conversation that we have weekly. Everything has to be optimized because we can't take any chance. Because we just need a junior developer to fill one part of the code, and then the background job just steals all the resources indefinitely. We do have security parameters to not allow a job to take more than, say, 50% of the CPU core cycle. But if something like this happens, and there's like 3 of them or 10 of them, we reach 90%, and I've seen them happen during the week, and it's the most on the weekends when it's like, for example, warehouses where there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of jobs producing data, a lot of stuff because we have clusters. We're always distributing data between another server in case one fails. We have a replication to another server, to another cluster. Like, for example, imagine if one of the data centers in Europe falls. We have a DR, which is a disaster recovery abbreviation. This means that everything we have on the northern system goes back to the west. So so people can continue to work, so the warehouse doesn't stop. Because the first thing I was ever told when I joined this job back in 2014, it was, this can never stop. The warehouse can never stop. If we stop, we're losing money.
Oh, yeah, warehouses, I mean. Well, I want to round out that conversation, though, with different memory types. So Carbon Cry writes in and asks, what do you think about serial memory interfaces? Technologies like CXL, IBM's AMI have advantages over the current parallel memory paradigm. You can attach flash as persistent memory. You could use any DRAM chips, DDR, GDR, even HBM maybe, and combine them. It would require a custom chip or FPGA in the middle, but I would expect hyperscale would exploit this opportunity. And you could also disaggregate compute and memory far more than ever before, which could make the logistics of building up, maintaining, and updating a data center far easier. You could have all the memory in one specialized rack instead of spread out in each node. How will these opportunities change the various types of data centers from smaller private settings all the way up to cloud and hyperscale?
I think for the cloud ones, especially the Microsoft Azure and Google and AWS and Alibaba, which don't sleep on it, trust me, on Alibaba. They're really growing a lot. I think there's a lot of stuff moving, and we can look at the consumer front as a perspective of what's coming to enterprise. The NVIDIA deal, there's something going in there, okay? Because I'll give you an example. I have people who do GPU workloads, and every time we need a GPU server, we have to order a GPU with EPYC or with something Cascade Lake, and we don't need the CPU performance. That's one big issue. That's why we're looking into the NVIDIA deal, and we're like, okay, this is interesting. They can give us a Tesla type of GPU and give us like an ARM CPU that doesn't that runs lower and it's cheaper to run. That means that the virtual machine on the data center will be cheaper, and we'll still get the GPU performance we need. We're just saving on the CPU, which we really don't need. So on the GPU front, I'm really excited about that. On the memory side of things, there's some cool stuff that Microsoft has been discussing, just like the interesting cooling underwater that they've been developing. There's a lot of type of technologies like that they don't usually come public, so I was really surprised about them coming public because the cloud business is very competitive. There's a lot of spying around. This is stuff that we've been hearing throughout the halls.
Yeah.
There's a lot of spying, especially, who, schematics showing up in the interwebs and stuff like that. There's a lot of corporate spying, just like before, guys. We just don't see it because now we have a lot of hidden stuff within the internet, and corporate spying exists, and that's happening. And one of the things I know that it's happening on the memory side is that we need better memory. And IBM has been pushing that a lot. Intel has been pushing that a lot. Optane, I think it was the biggest evolution of memory that we have seen in the last few years. Despite its price for enterprise, it's like I was saying, if Meltdown Inspector happened, like it happened, and if Intel didn't come out with Optane in the meanwhile, between that time period, I think enterprise was really pissed. Because...
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that... And that's why they're desperate to get Sapphire Rapids out so they can compete and maybe beat Zen 3, and at least because if Zen 4 were to come out before Sapphire Rapids is out, Intel has pissed off people so much that if it weren't for a few key things, their support, Optane, the fact that some code only runs on their stuff, they would have lost far more market share than they already have. And a lot of this is momentum, but it won't be momentum for long. Like you said, right? AMD's getting better. AMD's adding new features. AMD support is increasingly good, or better than it used to be. Yeah. People want to switch. It's up to Intel to make sure they get good enough, right?
If tomorrow ARM showed up with something much better than x86 and say, hey guys, everything runs here, everybody would switch. Sure, it wouldn't hit production maybe during the first 3 months, obviously, because...
when money's involved, there are no fanboys, right?
It's like I usually say, guys, look, I'll give you an example. I actually wanted Optane to run on a quality machine, a test machine that I have, because I wanted to run some tests. Management came and said, hey, this is not happening. This Optane module is just more expensive than 400 of our servers. You're simply not putting Optane there. So if someone shows up with something cheaper and it runs, just like on the consumer market, we're going to switch. Obviously, it's going to take a time. It's going to take a few years. It usually works just like everybody have been saying on this show, 4 to 5 years. It's the lifespan of a server. Usually smaller if you're running with infinite money. 2 years to 1.5 to 2.5 years. But this happens because you need more performance, more and more. That's why IBM is still an option for special companies. I know a lot of companies that still run IBM because they're the best. Look, they just got 2 nanometers down, and I'm sure some clients are going to get it.
No, they're on 2 nanometers and they frickin' ship something on 2 nanometers. Samsung said they were on 5 nanometers like 3 years ago. They're not. I just want to throw that out there because people do keep going, they're on 2 nanometers. Yeah, when I can buy an IBM chip on 2 nanometers, that's when I'll say they're on it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, as far as I'm concerned, they're not.
For the consumer, no. For the enterprise, I'm sure there's business. Because, for example, like I said, I have PowerPCs that they show capabilities way above anything we have in x86. So there's secret sauce there. It's a really good architecture, like I said. It's just not widely used because it's not in the best interests of these companies like Intel and AMD, which are the market leaders, obviously. IBM just stayed behind, Ever since the Mac has left PowerPC and the console as well, it kind of got in the back. But it still works for supercomputers, which is, at the end of the day, the customers with the most money, all right? So that's the important stuff. I think a lot of stuff that's going to happen in terms of custom stuff. Because if you look at HiSilicon and Huawei, this is something to really look out because they're doing some really interesting stuff. And they have infinite money backup, guys. They have a lot of stuff from Tencent and from all the other state companies from China. So HiSilicon...
From a communist government who will spend endless money if they need to.
If there's infinite money elsewhere in the world, people are always going to try to push. Like the whole story of SMIC, the company in China trying to do EUV and getting people from Holland, from Netherlands to China. This is something that has been discussed in the semiconductor industry for the last 2 years, that China is trying to get more people into SMIC to get down to 7 nanometers with EUV machines and stuff. So this is all really interesting stuff, and I think we're going to see ARM doing a big jump. I honestly never foresaw this happening. When Apple, the whole M1 situation, I have like 15 laptops here right next to me. They're all ARM stuff, most of them from Qualcomm on Windows, from Lenovo, from Dell, and they're still not up to par to what we have right now on x86. But I have my M1, and this is my daily work machine alongside my Dell Latitude. And for most stuff, I just run on the M1, and honestly, I get 15 hours of battery life. For me, this is a dream. There's only one missing here. That's a 5G modem inside, so I can put a 5G and go to the beach to work without a personal hotspot. Honestly, but that's the reality of stuff. For ARM is happening. And this push from Apple, I really like this push from Apple. I think it was really important for the consumer side. And it's already happening in Windows. We're seeing daily commits on Windows. Like, for example, this week, World of Warcraft supported Windows on ARM to play the game. Obviously, there's no good chips to play the game yet, obviously. But it's happening.
It's happening. It's happening slowly but surely.
I'm worried about Microsoft. I'm really worried. I think the Surface Pro X was an interesting device. We have one here. I have one here with me, actually. I'm going to send it back tomorrow. No, Monday. But I really liked it. But it's the experience. It's worse than on Rosetta on the M1, trying to emulate the x86 apps. I still have a couple of x86 emulated apps I still use, and it runs on the M1. But then again, I'm very interested in what happens next. I think the future for the next 5 years on the enterprise.
So why are you worried about Microsoft, though? Is it because you think that Apple, if they continue to innovate at a breakneck pace with their architecture, will make Windows look silly? Or like, what do you mean you're worried about Microsoft?
Here's the thing. Windows will never look silly. Here's the reality, because everybody uses it.
It's a monopoly, yeah.
Yeah, it's a monopoly. People say, oh, the Mac is growing. Sure, it's growing. Hell yeah, it's growing. Thank God it's growing. It needs to grow. It's a great platform for developers, universal developers that deploy everywhere, okay? All the developers I know that deploy everywhere, they use a Mac, period. Because they can use one device to deploy everywhere. This is the selling point for developers. For me, personally, it's the core being Unix. It's based on Unix. So for me, having a terminal with Homebrew installed on it and working, it's out of the box for me. I just have to install Homebrew. It works for me. And it's perfect. And it gives me 15 hours of battery life. That's why I love this MacBook Air. And the Thunderbolt, obviously. But for Windows PCs, the performance isn't just there. And it's these Qualcomm chips. They're just terrible, you know. And I hope Microsoft with their custom hardware comes forward. I know Google is doing their own silicon. This news actually hit the press today. I actually knew about it a couple of months ago. Someone commented on me, someone who works with Google, that they're trying to do a big push for silicon after seeing what Apple can do. Because everybody thought Apple would hit a stone wall, you know, and I thought too, you know, because Apple was never a hardware company at the SoC level, but they just got so big talent. They got so many big talents.
I mean, look, it's what I keep telling people. It's like, who would compete with Intel long term? And it's like, I don't know, maybe Apple. I mean, all they need is money. They have money. They can hire engineers to build CPUs, and they could buy fabs. I mean, long term, Apple's a real force to be reckoned with in silicon. I think.
It's obviously not going to hit overall market because they only hit with the MacBook Air. Like, for example, I saw it today.
Not anytime soon.
Yeah, not happening. No. But 50%, sure. You guys have to understand that. Like vendors, like Dell, HP, Lenovo, we do these deals 3 years, 5 years for laptops for every corporate member that we have in our company, and nobody's going to switch to the Mac because there isn't any IT good management platforms for this. Okay, like for example, I have my M1 Mac from my company. I don't have anything installed from them. They can't even look at it. They only shipped it to me. They bought it and they shipped it to me because they can't control it. Sure, there's some MDM to control it, but my company doesn't care because it's super complicated. And they got one guy to do like what? Of course, there won't be a huge deployment of Macs. I know one company in the US that have a huge deployment of Mac 1 minis for a server. But it's a 1 case or 2 case scenario that I know actually. But it's not happening for the average consumer. And like for example, I want to ask if anybody knows any laptop with a better keyboard than the Lenovo ThinkPad, because I have a Lenovo ThinkPad here right next to me.
I had a Lenovo laptop a while ago. They almost always do have really good keyboards.
And this thing is a joy to write on. I have the Carbon X1, the small one, the one that came out recently. They sent us to test, and honestly, we love ARM. We love the M1. Our team, the 15 guys who got to test the M1, everybody loved it. There's some people who don't like Mac. They wanted Linux on it, and it's not really working out of the box yet. So most people opted to get this Lenovo ThinkPad, and honestly, I think I'm going to stay with it because I really like it. It has 4G, and 5G. I think it has a 4x4 modem 5G here, so I can just swap it in and put it a card from a carrier and go work everywhere with it. So this is what I'm going to be with it for my daily driver. But I think Apple has done a really big step forward. I liked it. And honestly, I'm going to give you a really good example, guys. I have a 16-inch MacBook Pro, like I was telling Tom, and this thing is sitting here on the corner because this MacBook Air is better than it. And this 16 was $3,000 for me. I bought it in the US when I was there last time. And this thing, it's trash compared to this fanless laptop running an ARM chip that is an iPad CPU and GPU combined in SoC. So yeah, it's the future right here, and I can see it happening for the consumer, especially if it hits cheaper prices. I'm looking at it right now, and the MacBook Air goes for 850 on Amazon. So take it what you want right now.
When it comes down to it, it's the overall product that is what competes. You can like the M1, you can like this, you can like that, you can like AMD, you can like Intel.
Oh yeah.
But if an Intel laptop, even if it uses a 14 nanometer Comet Lake chip, I have a studio laptop that runs Intel and NVIDIA, and it's like, unfortunately, the AMD competitor in that NV15 at the time didn't have as good of a screen, didn't have as fast memory, and cost more without having as good of a graphics card.
Yeah.
It's not my fault. It's the overall product you buy. And I think when it comes to Microsoft staying competitive with Apple, I think a lot of that in the short term is just going to hinge on Zen 4 and Alder Lake being very good. That's the one thing I do push forward, though, when people bring up the M1, is it's like, well, the M1 came out, before Zen 4, before Alder Lake. So let's see how good those are before we say
and on
Apple's
5 nanometer,
everything.
Don't forget. Which is
exactly. So, I mean, of course it's better. It's a custom-built thing running their own
with
OS.
With the integrated memory, let's not forget this. It's actually pretty cool.
Let's see what Alder Lake and Zen 4 are. Those would be the fair comparisons.
Oh, yeah, no, but I completely agree, Tom. For example, like I said, I picked my Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Carbon for my daily driver. Mm-hmm. And the interview I'm doing this on, it's a Lenovo Legion 7i with a Comet Lake inside and an R3X 270 in its Max-Q, which is my gaming laptop on the go. And I'm really happy with it. I'm not going to replace it anytime soon. Like you said, it's a great product. I can game on it. I can do whatever I want with it. And it has a 6 hours battery life. It's enough for me because I'm always plugged in anyway. But for my trips, when I need to work, I'm taking my ThinkPad, which is x86, so it's 100% compliant with everything I use at work. Despite having a VM on the cloud, I still like to do local stuff. So I like the M1. I think it's great for the average consumer who browses Facebook and uses Office. It's great for business guys, for sales guys who just want to show off their laptop in meetings and stuff. And it's a great device. I mean, I love it. 15 hours battery life. I've done 2 days of work on it without having to charge it. But the reality is that I still need x86 for certain apps. Okay, this is my reality. So it depends on the reality of each person. And corporate will always deploy Lenovo's and Dell's and stuff because it's a business line laptops. They'll never deploy MacBook Airs, obviously.
Very rarely. I remember the CEO at my last company. He was allowed to use a MacBook, but of course he probably didn't need to do.
It's the special people always.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I think we've gone through servers, ARM, gaming, Xbox. I have a few remaining reader mails I could just blow through, but I mean, is there anything else subject you specifically want to get to? I mean, you said you're willing to talk about all types of different things from server, game development, hardware. Is there something we haven't touched on that you specifically want to talk about before we start wrapping up?
Actually, one question for you from my side. What do you think about mid-gen upgrades for the consoles this generation? Because this has been a conversation that a lot of people has been having. Honestly, for me, I don't think I see a point because 8K for me doesn't make a lot of sense. But what do you think? I honestly really think about multi-die GPUs. I think that could be a way forward.
Well, right. You could see a situation where Sony uses 2 compute units in 2023, 2 chiplets in 2023, and just doubles the performance, or more than doubles maybe, the performance of the PS5. In terms of mid-gen, though, what I would just say is nothing's coming out as a refresh this year, certainly, and probably not next year. But I just think when you look at Microsoft's naming scheme, I think it's painfully obvious. Series X, the Series S. So I think they'll have the 2020 edition, like buying a car, and then they'll say they have the 2023 edition of the Series X. In terms of PlayStation, I know there's rumors of a 6-nanometer PlayStation SoC coming out. Which I personally can't confirm. I did reach out to a couple people about that. I can't confirm it's real. It wouldn't surprise me if it was, but I think that's mostly to do with preparing dual sourcing between 2 nodes, and because 6 nanometer is design compatible with 7 nanometer, and maybe making a slim version that they sell at the same time they keep making the 7 nanometer version. And all I've ever been told consistently from the people that I really do trust about PlayStation stuff. These are people that got me information, about the Metal Gear Solid remake, the God of War reveal, which Metal Gear Solid remake is still a thing, everybody. I'll just confirm that. It's just, I have nothing else to add. It's still a thing. But that there's no real talk about a PS5 Pro right now. Does that mean they won't make one? No. And they didn't intend to make a PS4 Pro when the PS4 first came out. So I guess what I'm saying in summary is I think Xbox is obviously going to make something by 2024, and this is their plan, and they'll just put in faster SSDs and faster processors and bigger graphics cards. That's their plan. Sony, not so sure. I would expect they're going to release something because they need to compete. But at the same time, Sony, I've really heard they're insisting on sticking to generations. So it would not surprise me if instead of doing a mid-gen refresh, they just had the PS6 come out in like 2025. Like they had a 5-year gen like they used to have instead of these ridiculously long 6 to 7 year gens. That's kind of what I wonder if Sony will do, but I don't think they've made that decision quite yet. I don't think they will have until the end of the year.
All right, that makes sense. And honestly, on the point of the games that haven't been announced, like Metal Gear Solid is part of my childhood. Just like Siphon Filter and Ratchet Clank. But honestly,
that's a rumor I check on for myself, guys, not for you. I want that game to come out.
Well, thank you, Tom, for all of us. No, but seriously, I think that it makes no sense to announce games when there's no stock. They already got a pipeline of games like Horizon till the end of the year. I think Sony's in a really good position, and they're doing some, from what I know from people who work in the cloud industry, they're doing some big moves on the cloud front, because since here's the thing, I know a bit about Gaikai because I actually knew some guy who worked with Gaikai. I found out by surprise, but he told me that thing has to be renewed, the architecture completely. So I think there's going to be some really big news coming on that front. Especially
in terms of backwards compatibility?
I think it's towards more the cloud service, as in to compete with xCloud and maybe provide some sort of
Well, they're going to have to either way. And I think no matter what, you're going to see some big overhaul where they combine PlayStation Plus and PS Now or something with better performance, and then at the same time announce backwards compatibility potentially. At least if they're competent, that's what they should be doing, because I don't know what else they would be doing right now with everything we're hearing.
The only thing I know really is from the technical side. I know they're restructuring the whole cloud process on the background from the Gaikai's old systems, because this guy that was hired is someone he worked with me, and he told me that they're doing some reconstructing. He actually got to work in San Mateos. He went to the US to work with them before the pandemic. And this was a while ago. Guys, remember architecturing a cloud server. So I know I got servers that will only be deployed within 2 years time frame if necessary. So this is just like semiconductors. When you plan stuff, sometimes you only deploy it within 2 years. So yeah, let's see what happens. I'm very curious about this.
I think there is honestly a good place to stop it. I mean, I know it's like pretty late where you are, and this happens, though, where I get a guest on I haven't talked to before. Usually the first episode is extra long. So we'll see what happens here. I actually think what I'm going to do is take the back third and most of it and turn that into a die shrink for supporters.
Oh, definitely.
And then try to bundle those subjects together to be its own conversation piece there. You'll see the wizards of editing, people, when you hear that come out. But otherwise, I mean, I really want to thank you for coming on to discuss your background deploying Xbox as a server APU, which is something no one talks about enough, I think. Azure, the benefits of Azure and its competitors, and of course, everything having to do with servers, CXL, Optane, all of that. I know that there's a lot here for the diverse set of broken silicon listeners. And then, of course, I think another die shrink here just talking about the tech and the upcoming PlayStation stuff as well. So I think we'll do that. I mean, I want to thank you for coming on. I don't know. I mean, any last words, anything to plug? I doubt so. You're an anonymous guest. I mean, anything to plug or any last things you want to say to people listening?
From my side, I would just like to thank the community. And I think there's some answers we didn't answer from the questions, so I can do it offline and you can post them. But I would like to thank you and Dan and all the guests from the previous months and years, because you've kept me company while traveling throughout countries while I was working. So that was it was a very big point.
Yeah. Podcasts are such a godsend for travel now. It's ridiculous. I can't even. I used to drive 9 hours to college, and it was just madness in terms of how bored I would get.
Oh yeah, I have 2 houses, so I drive a lot, 6 hours. And and just especially the off week with Dan, it's just been awesome. So I just like to thank you for that. And I hope I can pass some knowledge on.
You did, don't worry. So, thanks for coming on, and thank you everyone for listening. This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, I don't do this alone. Moore's Law is Dead is a team with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother, Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, and special assistance by Carbon Cry. Find all of our information, including the information of sponsors you can support, at www.mooreslawsdead.com. If you would like to send fan mail or hardware to us, please mail parcels to Moore's Law is Dead at P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. And speaking of fans, patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content possible. The aging business model of spamming ads all over the content is dying. The future of media will be built on fans paying for the content they actually want to exist. And so if you have the extra money, but only if you do, please consider supporting us. For just $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to have your questions read aloud on Broken Silicon, Die Shrink, and Loose Ends, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who would love to meet you and talk to you about computer hardware. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the entire back catalog of Flyover States podcasts and other projects Moore's Law is Dead has done, and thanks in the credits of videos and other perks as well. And hey, if you can't afford to support us, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family on social media, Reddit, and forums. And give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or your preferred podcast app. All of this really does help so much. And if you'd like to advertise on the podcast, hire Tom for consulting, or are a person of interest who would like to be a guest, please reach out to the email address mlhbdead@gmail.com. But as I said, this podcast would not be possible without its patrons supporting it, and so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher producer levels: Brad Medlin, Telos, GUK, Benny Berlin, Justin Yant, Thomas Rupp, I Love You, Lynn and Jim, Ivan K, Tom Bailey, Muhammad Al-Khorari, Frederick Lau, James Crassa, Justin Parrish, Zachary Martin, Terrence Harrod, Drita Full, Phil S, Courtney Elliott, The Ninth Dude, Greg Renegard, Josh Law, JBG, Travis Gooding, Mechanical Philosopher, Lebo King Kilo, Fatboy Disaru, Daniel Hyde, Aguayimpa 81, Nathan Mose, Jack O'Neill, Matt Salem, Aaron Close, Juan Garcia, Sean Vollmer, My Name is Nobody, Judson N, Alethros, Telos, Hey There's a Kitty, Greg T. Wanchik, Ivan 214, John Jameson, Benjamin Cannon, Matthew Lane, Mark Raidmaker, Jane Rauner, Rubber Ducks, Michael McGee, Allie Robertson, Eric Jackson, Jonathan, Patrick Groh, Evan Dingle, Dominique Cox, Stefan, Original Ross, Hard4Room.com, Sam MacArthur, Total Silo, Sol Connor, Michael Casa, Andrew S., Blake, Aaron Keith, Kerry Baldino, Endless Loggins, Tom Sanfilippo, Justice Brennan, Suit Taylor, Trevor Powers, Stu, Elenia, Nana, Daniel Nishbal, Franco Frederic, Dane Galanowski, Alex Carastillo, Dark Rain 2049, Leighton Perry, Joseph Karaman, Carlos Valdez, Carnivore Bear, Denovan Russell, Zaber Zebers, Licky, Matin Porsagi, David Cowden, Ricky Tan, Spencer King, Patrick J.S., Justin Staples, Freddie Canos Jr., Stephen Coates, Kiwi Phil, DeHoo-Hoo, Sarah Light, Anthony Gareffa, Matthew Griffin, Eddie Del Castillo, Joseph Loria, Luis Correa, Deke, Cheesy Ramen, Raul Abenetti, Tim Robbins, Jake223, Brian Riggleman, Samuel, Caillou Markelli, Dave McCoy, Valco Malev, Gabe Langner, Rodney, Morton Svensson, Michael Deaton, Thomas Summers, Maurice Courtois, Matthew J. Link, Scott Raff Schneider, Mai Sharona, Y. Truey, Roman, Jacob Stankiewicz, K. Raz, Wakir Khan, Eshildar Epstein, Stephen Hart, Christopher A. Butler, Greg, Peter Moore, Chris Licata, Justin Thomas, Sam Miller, Sammy Malays, Kevin Chen, Shakir, Nick Rakin, Holden Mobley, Matthew Lazier, R. Pete Sharma, Meat and Pork, Jimmy NG, Mads Beachhorn, Benjamin Oshley, Zajit, Shield TV Couteau, Dane P., John Wizink, Sam Venzel, Mark Mitchell, Brucha, Jeremy So, James Anderson, Jesse Jaskawiak, Ian Clifford, Tyler Lindley, MJB1SS, and Jensen Huang. Thank you for supporting us, CEO of NVIDIA. And of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.